Chapter 1, 24-Hour Sex Shop. No, I'm about to start school. When Sue was sitting in the car, tapping on the computer with a crackling sound. He sounded a little speechless. Is it reasonable for you to drag me here? At this moment, he was wearing pajamas, his eyes fixed on the computer, and his fingers tapping on the keyboard nonstop. This was a business car with a lot of space inside. There was one person sitting in the driver's seat, and two people sitting next to him. Their expressions were all very serious. The younger boy on the left let out a smile, apologizing that this was not ugly uncle who had been called away at the last minute, but he had been told to find you, and you happened to live nearby. When Zay blinked, finally taking his eyes off the computer. He was a boy with a boyish appearance, not offensive in appearance, but very good-looking. There was a slight femininity to him, which is why he was considered good-looking. At this time, he reached over and took the glasses next to him and put them on, hiding that slight femininity very well. The whole person became gentle and refined, and you couldn't see the slightest hint of effeminacy. You might even inadvertently feel that he was a bit dangerous. Zhao Li sighed beside him. This was the first time I had seen how a pair of glasses could completely change a person. The young-looking man in front of me is actually one of the key figures in the National Security Department. Their department is a special department independent of the National Security Department. It is relatively hidden and not well known, but they are basically responsible for some things that cannot be seen in the light. In fact, there are many things in this world that cannot be made public, such as the department where one works. Their work is dangerous and mostly cannot be seen in public. Even the general public may not understand the existence of their department. But they are an indispensable part of the country. Where there is sunlight, there is darkness. Wanzet and his colleagues are the cleaners who deal with that darkness. Wanzet is the youngest member of their team. He is just 21 years old and a junior college student. But he is a computer genius, and the definition of genius is actually difficult to define. This word was put on Wansu by others, and he is more inclined to think of himself as an unremarkable college student. At the beginning, he would join this department completely by the set path. His boss is also what they call the ugly uncle, Wang Chang. Back then, he said on various forum websites that he had developed a software that absolutely no one could crack. It happened that when Sue was bored after the college entrance examination, so he downloaded what he called software that no one could crack. In fact, it was really difficult. That was the first time when Sue spent 12 hours to crack it. But that software was something Wang Chang and a few key members of his team had spent 3 days working on. The day after Wensa cracked it, Wang Chang and his men knocked on Wensa's door. Wensa just wanted to sigh when he thought about it. You really shouldn't just open the door to strangers. Very often, the door you open can change your life. For example, right now, he has to stay up in the middle of the night to help them monitor the whereabouts of this important chemical. Have you guys started the process? Wensu looked at the monitoring on the computer. The monitoring location is the 24-hour sex toy store across the street. Their mission this time is to get this person to successfully deliver the chemical substance stolen from the lab, and finally arrest the person. As for why they want him to deliver the item? It's simple, because the item he received is fake, and they have placed their newly developed monitoring locator inside. As long as the item is delivered, they will be able to find the other party's location and then make a net capture. It didn't go. Uncle Ugly said that if you want to go through the process, you'll just end up arguing with everyone. Zhao Lily said with righteous indignation. When so, I knew it. I'm not writing a check, this has nothing to do with me, I was caught by you guys at the last minute. In the 3 years since joining, I've written more checks than I did homework in high school, and he really couldn't take it anymore. At this time, the middle-aged man Luo Chang, who had been sitting quietly on the other side, sighed. Xiao Wen, it's useless. I joined the department when I was in my 20s, and now I'm 40 and still writing checks. I can't escape a second time. Just as he said this, a person appeared in the surveillance footage. This person was wearing what looked like pajamas, with bunny ears on top of their head. They were swaying along, wrapped up tightly, with a face mask on their face. They walked stiffly in, and then stopped in front of the rows of containers. This? It's a woman? Zhao Li hesitated. Are you afraid that she's not an idiot? Luo Chang rolled his eyes. Our people are still following her, she shouldn't have arrived yet. It's not her. Wensu also shook his head and pointed to another screen, saying that our target was still a block away. A red dot on the screen was moving carefully. Oh, that's someone shopping. At this time of day, a girl is shopping? This can't be a scumbag, can it? Zhao Li muttered. Wenso leaned back in his car seat and watched the girl on the monitor as she stood in front of the container, not moving and not knowing what to do. 3 minutes passed like this. Could it be that the monitor is out of order? Zhao Li asked. Luo Chang was also a little worried. The target would be here in a while, and if someone was here. So why didn't you clear the place? Wenso asked back. We've been crouching here for days, and basically no one comes here. Zhao Li said, and clearing the place at this time would be too obvious. The other party is too cunning. Wenso let out a sound of exasperation. So what do we do now? She's not moving. Zhao Li and Luo Cheng's gazes suddenly fell on him. Wenso. He smiled and pushed his glasses up his nose. You know I'm just here to monitor the surveillance cameras, right? I don't have any combat skills. We know that, but we're not asking you to fight. You're really the second handsome guy in our department, so why don't you go take a look? Zhao Li laughed and pointed at the red, saying that the bastard would be here in a few minutes. Why aren't you going? Wensu was speechless. Who was the first handsome guy? The first handsome guy is the reader of the rabbit's head. Zhao Li looked righteous, and he had seen me and Brother Chang. The mole this time is someone from within their ranks, an old employee. Wensu has been well protected by them. Except for a few core team members, no one else has basically seen him. They only know that there is a powerful technician in the information department named Black Shadow. Wensu was silent, and he glanced again at the back view in the surveillance camera. This time she moved, shifting a little to the side. But she still didn't seem to be leaving. Can I call you Brother One? Oh, normally when someone comes in like this, they just leave. Zhao Li was getting a little anxious, his tone full of confusion. Does she really know us? Wensu sighed, all right, I'll go, but remember to protect me. With that, he pushed open the car door and got out. As soon as he got out, a gust of wind blew past, and Wensu, who was still wearing his pajamas, quickened his pace a little, feeling a bit cold. At this moment, the two people in the car saw the girl standing in front of the cabinet for a long time and finally reached out and tapped the screen in front of her. Something quickly fell out, and she squatted down to pick it up, and then waited for a while. Wensu was at this moment that he pushed open the glass door and walked in. Chapter 2, I think people think I'm a pervert. Wensu pushed the door open, and a cold wind blew in. The girl who had been crouching in front of the vending machine stood up suddenly, as if she had been startled. Wensu was shocked by her sudden movement. He froze for a moment and looked at the girl, meeting a pair of bright, beautiful eyes. However, these eyes seemed to be a little shimmering and did not dare to meet his gaze. Then Wensu saw shyness in her eyes. Zhao Li's voice came from the earpiece. When you first went in, this girl had just bought something. Wensu's gaze fell on the object that had fallen to the ground when she stood up. The girl noticed his gaze and, as if frightened, suddenly lowered her head, reached out to cover her face, and ran out. Wensu let out a sigh and tried to call out to her, forgetting to take something. But it was a good thing he didn't say anything, because as soon as he did, the girl ran even faster. The door, which he had pushed open, quickly closed, leaving only a gust of cold wind. Wensu glanced at the door, which was already empty, and then at the box that had been left on the ground. Hurry back, the target is almost here. Luo Chang said in a deep voice. Wensu sighed, walked over, picked up the things that had been left behind, and turned to leave. As soon as he got into the car, the red dot of the target appeared on the street and then stopped. The two people in the car were staring at the computer. Instead, Wensu glanced at the object in his hand in the light. Third gear, comfortable, enjoyable, feminine. He reached out awkwardly and touched the tip of his nose. No wonder the girl was embarrassed to take it, because he suddenly went in? At this time, Luo Lianqing, who had just run out of the 24-hour store, was burning with anger. Why? Embarrassing things can happen. Why? Where would you buy this kind of thing without a bag? Why? I would forget to take it. And I left it there? Ah, she paid 168 yuan for it. She walked quickly with her flip-flop feet, and when she passed the intersection, she saw a man with a backpack on his back talking on the phone. He looked at her when he saw her running past. I guess he thought her outfit was strange. But at this time, Luo Yiqing just wanted to go home quickly, hoping that the boy just now didn't see her face clearly. But that boy seems a bit familiar, doesn't he? Half an hour later, they watched the boy on the security camera open the store cupboard, put something behind a CQ doll, then looked around, glanced at the position of the security camera, quickly looked down, and then walked out. I guess they don't know that we've hacked their security camera yet. This guy is really talented, to think of coming here to exchange things. Zhao Li muttered, "This is the first time for me." When Su saw the people go far away, the red dot stopped at the position opposite to them, and the long mouth yawned. "Can I go now? I'm adjusting to the rhythm of the school year, school starts in a few days." Zhao Li snorted, "Have a good day." Luo Chang also smiled and said, "You've worked hard, we'll take care of the rest." When Su also didn't mind, said a few words and left. Then he greeted the man in the driver's seat who had never hummed, "I'm leaving, brother Hey." The man named Hey nodded. "Hey, take your stuff with you." Zhao Li stopped him from getting out of the car and put the female condom he took out into his hand. When Su glanced at it for a moment, speechless. "No, this was dropped by the girl just now. You can put it back later and see if she comes back to get it." After saying that, he got off the car and walked away. Zhao Li muttered as he saw the closing car door, how did he know it was a girl? She was so well wrapped up. Of course Wen Su knew it was a girl, from her panicked behavior and those eyes. At a glance, he could tell that the girl was not old, and those eyes always felt a bit familiar to him. He stretched and quickly ran towards the residential area not far ahead, completely unaware that this direction was the same as the direction in which Luo Lianqing had just run in. Wen Su had just moved into the residential area 2 days ago. Previously, he had always stayed in a dormitory, but due to the particularity of his work, his relationships with his dormitory roommates were quite average, mainly because he was not very good at socializing. Moreover, they would be in their 3rd year of college in the 2nd semester when the semester started, so Wen Su thought about it and moved out early. Otherwise, he would not be very comfortable living in a dormitory. Wen Su went up to his own house and noticed that the lights were still on in the house opposite when he opened the door. It seemed that the person opposite him had just moved in not long ago, and he had not yet seen this neighbor come out. As if he was afraid that the door would suddenly open opposite him, Wen Su quickly pushed the door in. After closing the door, he let out a sigh of relief. He actually didn't like dealing with familiar people very much, as it would make him feel a little nervous. Because of this, his university classmates all thought he was quite aloof, and they rarely participated in group activities together. But university was much better than high school or junior high school. At least Wen Su didn't feel excluded. After all, everyone was quite mature and didn't have so many childish thoughts. Wen Su walked into the room and sat down at the computer desk. His desktop was very clean, with only the computer and 2 picture frames. One was a photo of him and his parents, and the other was a photo of 2 little girls. He picked up the photo of the 2 little girls. One was taller and had a bright smile, while the other was smaller and had a shy smile. Wen Su's gaze rested on the taller girl, looking at those eyes. He finally remembered why the eyes of the girl he had just met looked so familiar. Those eyes were at least 90% similar to the eyes of the little girl in the photo frame. He reached out and tapped the little girl in the photo frame. "Was it an accident? Or did I find you?" At this moment, he did not know that a beautiful girl in the house opposite his was rolling on the bed in frustration. She had changed out of her bulky bunny pajamas, and the room was heated. She was wearing only a pair of form-fitting short pajamas. They outlined her perfect figure nicely, and her long, perfectly shaped legs were unbelievable. At this moment, she was rolling around and kicking her legs. "Meow meow, I never knew that people could really be this annoying. I'm really going crazy." A sleepy voice came over the phone. "Luo Yuqing, what's wrong with you? It's 2 a.m. in the morning, instead of sleeping, you went to the 24-hour vending machine to buy that stuff? What if you encounter a pervert?" Luo Yuqing's rolling motion stopped, and she lay straight on the bed. Her waist was thin, her legs were long, and her breasts were rising and falling. She looked at the pale yellow light above her head, "But I wouldn't dare go during the day." Her voice was a little weak. "I guess people think I'm a pervert." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the phone. "You do look quite similar, no hard feelings." Luo Lianqing let out a wail of despair. "Help." Chapter 3, Fate, Wonderful Beyond Words. The next day, Wen Su woke up early. He first ran a few laps in the community garden downstairs, and after meeting a group of enthusiastic ants, he finally hurried home. The ants were so enthusiastic, and there were a group of them. He couldn't handle it. After taking a shower at home, he found a few more messages on his phone. It was from one of his roommates from university, Lin Fan, who asked him when he was going to move back into the dorm. Wensu sighed and replied, "I'm not going to live in the dorm this semester. Didn't I mention that at the end of last semester? A relative of mine moved out, and I just moved into the empty room. I don't have many classes this semester anyway." Wensu felt a little uncomfortable in terms of interpersonal relationships, but he was now able to adapt well and knew how to maintain basic relationships. Lin Fan quickly sent a smiley face with the word "ah." Wensu frowned slightly, not knowing how to reply. Fortunately, Lin Fan quickly sent another message saying, "I forgot, haha, never mind. So, would you like to go to your house and hang out sometime?" "Not really." Wensu sighed and sent a smiley face with the word "okay." In fact, compared to dealing with other people, he would rather be in front of a computer. It made him feel a lot more comfortable. After replying to Lin Fan's message, Wensu opened the refrigerator and looked inside. Sure enough, there was nothing in it. He remembered that there seemed to be a fairly large supermarket across the street. He hadn't even finished buying toiletries, so he might as well go and buy them all at once. After finding his glasses and putting them on, he felt much more confident. He changed his clothes, put on his shoes, and went out. When he walked to the elevator, he happened to see it go down. He was still glad that he had come out late, otherwise he would have had to greet the people in the elevator again. The elevator quickly went down and then came back up again. It was probably just after rush hour, and the trip was empty. There weren't many people in the supermarket either, so Wensu had the rare opportunity to take his time browsing. He still reflexively avoided the promotional area, where there were more people. By the time he had finished browsing from the first floor to the second, his shopping cart was half full. After all, he had just moved in, and there were still a lot of things to buy. When he reached the household goods section, he bought toiletries and then looked up and saw a slender figure in front of him. It was hard not to notice that her legs were long. Her long hair was trailing behind her, just reaching her waist, making her waist look really thin. Unfortunately, Wensu was a leg man. And people are visual creatures, so basically when you encounter something that looks good, you can't help but take a second look. But Wensu only glanced at her before looking away, and it would have been rude to look again. It was just that he suddenly felt a little strange and couldn't help but take another look at that back. The stiff posture made him feel a little familiar. His gaze swept over the area where the girl was standing. In front of her were neatly arranged essential items such as human pups' poop bags. Now this image is even more familiar. Although it is not exactly the same, it is 80% similar. Wensu couldn't help but push his flat glasses without prescription. Perhaps feeling the gaze behind him, the stiff back moved, and then slowly turned his head to look over. Then Wensu clearly saw what was called a pupil earthquake. The girl still had a mask on her face, and her gaze at him was shocked. She slightly widened her beautiful big eyes. It made Wensu think of the cute stuffed cat in the Emoticon pack. Then the girl slammed her eyes shut, turned around, and took a few faltering steps forward. She then stopped in her tracks, turned her head to look at Wensu again, as if she was hesitating, but in the end she quickly turned around and ran away again. Wensu watched her entire series of actions without uttering a sound. He just watched her back go further and further away, and then he pushed the shopping cart himself to the position where she had just been standing. Looking at the things on the cabinet, Wensu couldn't help but feel a little confused. If it were about the things from last night, he could understand. Everyone has physiological needs, but this thing in front of him. Wensu regretted thinking that maybe she had a boyfriend. Her boyfriend must be very happy. Wensu shook his head and wondered why he was thinking about this. Then he pushed the shopping cart away. When he paid, Wensu couldn't help but wonder, having met her twice in such a short time, she must live nearby, right? What Wensu didn't know at this time was, fate is wonderful. On his way back with the groceries, he received a call from the delivery service. "Hello, Mr. Wan, your delivery box is full, can I put your things on top of the box in Zone C? It's just your one delivery, so you'll be able to see it as soon as it arrives." The person on the other end sounded very anxious, and Wensu responded, "Okay. Thank you for understanding, please pick up the package as soon as possible." Wensu responded and the other party hung up the phone quickly. Wensu took the package and went to pick up the express delivery. There was indeed only one express delivery in Zone C. Wensu was carrying a lot of things, so after he looked at the address on the package, he took it all upstairs without noticing that there was another express delivery inside. After Wensu got home, he first organized the ingredients and tidied up the place before directly opening the express delivery. The weight should be from the clothes he bought. But after opening it, he looked at what he was holding in his hands and fell silent. This is indeed clothing. It's still a very sexy, female, underwear? To be precise, it should be erotic underwear. With a fox tail and ears. Wensu's face turned a little red. He is a man, so naturally he has also watched some educational films. So when he saw it, he suddenly had a picture in his mind. The most important thing is that the girl in the picture has those long, straight, seductive legs. Wensu rarely cursed under his breath, and he realized that he was being a bit creepy. He put the sexy clothes aside with some embarrassment, and then picked up the delivery bag that he had casually thrown on the ground. It said, 808B, Building 8, Lolo loves snacks, collect. Very good, it's his neighbor across the street. Wensu really couldn't understand why they didn't use 808 or 809 to distinguish between them, and had to use the letter AB. Although he was mad inside, he still had to return the wrong package. Wensu looked at the things on the sofa and resignedly started looking for a bag to put it in. He wanted to put it back in the delivery bag, but he had already torn it open. After finally finding a bag and stuffing the clothes into it, Wensu still felt very embarrassed. He didn't want to go out at all, and he didn't want to go to the community center. But in the end, he went out carrying the bag and a bunch of grapes, which were a kind of apology. He also put a note in the bag, clearly explaining what had happened and his apology, and even saying that he could compensate for the noise. This was mainly because he hoped that his neighbors would not be home, so he could just hang the bag on their doorstep. Unfortunately, as soon as he knocked on the door, he heard footsteps inside. A soft female voice came from inside, coming. Chapter 4, People can die of society, but they shouldn't die of continuous society. With the sound of the door opening, Wensu felt his whole body go numb. A very beautiful face appeared at the door. The girl had a very delicate face, like a doll's face, with beautiful almond-shaped eyes, a small nose, and a slightly open mouth below. However, at this moment, the girl's expression was full of panic. Wensu's gaze fell on those beautiful big eyes. The first thought that flashed through his mind was that she was indeed as beautiful as he had imagined. The second thought was, how embarrassing. Luo Lianqing felt bad all over. She thought she was meeting her best friend Miao Miao, so she opened the door without hesitation. Why was it the young man she had met before at the door? The atmosphere was a little awkward for a while. Still, Luo Lianqing couldn't stand it anymore and spoke softly. Her posture was one of defiance, her head poking out, but her body was blocked inside by the door. Hello, what can I do for you? Wensu then awkwardly lifted the bag in his hand and said, hello, I'm your neighbor across the street. I was not paying attention when I picked up the package and accidentally took the wrong one, so I'm returning it to you. Luo Lianqing reached out and took the bag from him. She felt slightly relieved and was a little glad that he probably didn't recognize her because she was wearing a mask. She said, thank you for bringing it over. She felt the object in her hand become a little heavier. She was about to take a look when the tall, thin, fair-skinned boy in front of her spoke even more awkwardly. Because I wasn't paying attention, I accidentally opened it. If you mind, I can compensate you. At this moment, Luo Lianqing still didn't know the seriousness of the matter. She said without much concern, it's okay, it's just the wrong one. I didn't buy anything valuable, really it's okay. Wensu paused for a moment, hesitating whether to tell her what was inside. It was quite personal, and if she minded, he could let her buy a new one and compensate her. But if he told her, the awkward situation would become even more embarrassing. Just then, the elevator dinged. A petite girl with short hair walked out. Miao Miao froze for a moment when she saw a guy standing in front of her best friend's door. She walked over and called out, Lolo? Is this your friend? Why don't you go in? Wenze took a step back, a little embarrassed, and said, I won't disturb you then. After saying this, he nodded to Miao Miao and turned back to his room. Luo Lianqing saw him enter the room and quickly reached out and grabbed his girlfriend, entering the room and closing the door in one go. Then she collapsed in her arms, hugging Miao Miao. That guy just now is the one I met last night and this morning. He's actually my neighbor. It is estimated that her voice was too broken, and Miao Miao, who rarely laughed at her, reached out and took the bag from her hand instead. So the other person came to say hello? Is this a gift? You said you were wearing a mask, so maybe the other person didn't notice. Your neighbor is quite handsome. Miao Miao's voice suddenly stopped. Luo Yuqing looked at her and saw her squeeze out a sentence between her teeth as she looked at the contents of the bag. Is your neighbor a pervert? Luo Lianqing frowned. Why are you suddenly cursing? Then she saw what was in the bag and her face turned pale, red, and white. I'm moving, Luo Lianqing said with a weak voice. People can die, but they shouldn't die in a row. Wen Su on this side was relieved. It was really embarrassing just now. No exaggeration, his scalp had begun to tingle. But at this moment, the beautiful face still flashed through his mind, as well as the pair of long legs he saw this morning. Her name was Lolo? Could it be a coincidence? Wen Su narrowed his eyes and glanced at the doorway again. Whether it was a coincidence or not, they were neighbors after all, and they should meet again in the future, right? Wen Su waited all day that day but never got the neighbor to add him on WeChat. So he probably wouldn't get the compensation, right? Thinking about the sexy outfit, Wen Su sighed. He should have just put the money in. How could a girl be so embarrassed to actually add WeChat to ask for compensation? Wen Su didn't meet the neighbor across the street for the next few days, which made him slightly relieved. It would be too awkward to meet. If they did meet, he didn't know what to do. It wasn't until the day before school started that the dorm group, which had been quiet for a long time, began to become active. There were 4 people in their dormitory, 3 of whom were from other places, and only Lin Fan was a local. At this time, they should all be back in the dormitory. Lin Fan was asking Wen Su to come out for dinner together, saying that even if you move out, you still have to eat with the group. Wen Su looked at Lin Fan's message in the group chat and replied, okay. Because he is not good at socializing, in fact, other people sometimes feel that he is quite pretentious. Coupled with the fact that he is from the south, when he first came here to go to university, he actually felt a bit out of place, which was particularly obvious. Fortunately, Lin Fan is active and doesn't mind that he doesn't say much, and he always drags him along to participate in activities. Slowly, Wen Su also seems to be a lot more sociable, and in his heart, he still considers Lin Fan a friend. So generally, when he calls, Wen Su rarely refuses. The place to eat is a small shop across the street from the school. Now that many people have returned home for the holidays, the shop is crowded. When Wen Su arrived, the other 3 people in his dormitory had already arrived. They let out an exaggerated cry when they saw him, saying, "Brother Su, you moved out on your own." Wang Mang looked at Wen Su sitting down and said bitterly, "Is it because I snore in my sleep?" Lu Shumu laughed and said, "You know it too, it's not that you snore, it's thunder." Wood is right, Lin Fan said with a smile, then patted Wen Su on the back. Our one has found an internship, and he's afraid that sometimes he'll come home late and disturb us. He winked at Wen Su. Wen Su immediately reacted, and Lin Fan had already thought of an excuse for him. He also nodded with a smile, "Yes, I'm afraid of disturbing you, so I'll pay for this meal." "I'm sorry I didn't tell you in advance." Wang Mang and Lu Shumu's faces brightened a little. After all, their roommate had moved out without saying a word to either of them. They were upset when they found out. Now that Wen Su had said something, they felt better. They just muttered about ordering more food. When the food was almost served, Wang Meng suddenly said, "Hey, by the way, I heard that our tutor is going to be replaced this semester. The original tutor seems to have quit." "Huh? We're only changing tutors in our junior year?" Lu Shumu was a little surprised. Lin Fan didn't believe it, and said, "Don't tell me it's just hearsay?" Wang Meng nodded, and said, "I don't believe it either. They even said that we'll get a new beautiful female tutor, but where would there be so many beautiful women? It's definitely a lie. But when it comes to beautiful women, hey. Wang Meng winked at Wen Su, and said, "Our class flower even asked if you'd gone to the dormitory yet, and if you needed help cleaning up." The other 2 also looked at Wen Su, smiling ambiguously. Chapter 5, This beautiful tutor is my neighbor. Wen Su looked at their gossiping gazes and felt a little helpless. Don't talk nonsense, guys. A girl's reputation is important. It's not like we're talking nonsense. Wang Mang looked full of curiosity. Really, the class flower asked me. Look, I still have the chat history. As he said this, he took out his phone to show them, but Wen Su reached out and covered his phone. Megzi. That tone is a bit heavy, it's not good for a girl's reputation. Wang Meng's movement stopped. Lin Fan laughed and tried to smooth things over, saying, "Yes, let's not talk about that. Where are the girls?" Lu Shumu nodded, saying, "Let's eat. It'll get cold. I really miss this at home." Wang Meng's face looked a little bad, so in the end he put the phone back, but he had other thoughts in his mind. Wensu didn't have so many twists and turns. Seeing him put the phone down, he quickly picked up his chopsticks and started eating. After a couple of sips of beer at the table, the atmosphere heated up again. Wensu mostly listened, occasionally answering a word or two when he was asked. After dinner, Wang Meng said he was going to go find his girlfriend and left. The remaining three sat in their chairs without moving. Lin Fan sighed, reached out and patted Wensu. Xiaowen, don't worry about Wang Meng, he's just a little petty. Lu Shumu also nodded, not caring what he said. Wensu shook his head with a smile, it's fine. Just now during dinner, Wang Meng's words and actions were all stabbing Wensu. Wensu is relatively quiet, but he is not the type to take abuse without responding, and he pushed back. That's why Wang Meng finally left in a bad mood to go find his girlfriend. But Wen is not soft-hearted either. Lin Fan couldn't help but laugh when he thought about Wang Meng's face just now. It's not like his girlfriend confessed to you before? Why is he so petty and calculating? It was all a freshman year thing. Wensu just shook his head, estimating that this would be quite embarrassing for someone else. Lin Fan and the others thought about it for a moment and agreed that it was quite embarrassing. The two men didn't mention the topic again, and after chatting for a while, the three of them dispersed. School would start tomorrow, and before they parted, Lin Fan reminded Wensu not to be late. Wensu nodded with a smile. On the way back, he walked back. Wensu actually felt that his appearance was really quite average, at most it could be considered okay. But it seemed that his luck with girls was unexpectedly good. He let out a breath, and decided not to think about it. He didn't want to fall in love anyway. But when he thought about it, he couldn't help but see the somewhat familiar face of his neighbor across the hall, and those long legs. Wensu immediately went into the small supermarket next door and bought a bottle of ice water. He must have not rewarded himself for a long time, and was just being silly. The next morning, Wensu got up relatively early on the first day of school. When he left the building, he happened to see the elevator doors close, and through the gap he seemed to see the face of his beautiful neighbor. But the other person did not see him. Wensu arrived in the classroom just as Lin Fan and the others had already arrived. They hadn't seen each other over the winter vacation, and many of them greeted him warmly. Wensu walked over with a smile on his face and sat in the seat that Lin Fan had saved for him. As soon as he sat down, he heard them discussing what sounded like a change of tutors. He didn't realize that there were still quite a few people who knew about it, but everyone was just half believing it. Wensu listened to their discussion. The girl sitting in front of him suddenly turned her head. Her pretty and gentle face was wearing a smile. Wensu, have you had breakfast yet? She said, and put the milk in her hand on his desktop. The girl was Qin Yanran, the flower of the class that Wang Meng had mentioned last night. She was indeed quite pretty, the kind of appearance that was not aggressive and made boys feel protective. At this moment, a pair of puppy dog eyes looked straight at Wensu, and they looked very cute. The boys sitting around them unconsciously lowered their voices and looked at the two of them. The only person whose face didn't seem to change was Wensu. He just gently pushed the milk back and said, "Thanks, I already had breakfast." Qin Yanran didn't feel embarrassed either. She reached out and took the milk back. "Okay, I heard that you moved out. Where is the community?" "We're in our third year, and I want to move out too." A boy let out an "oh" and tried to stir up trouble. Wensu frowned slightly. He really didn't like being stared at and provoked. Just as he was wondering how to respond, the sound of a pair of high heels tapping on the floor resounded. The crisp sound was obvious even in the noisy environment. Someone let out a surprised sound. Wensu looked up. A beautiful young girl stood on the podium holding a book stand. The girl had light makeup on, a smile on her delicate and pretty face, and her long, beautiful curls were not hanging behind her back this time, but loosely tied up, giving her an added touch of intellectuality. She was wearing a white shirt and, instead of a skirt, she was wearing black trousers. The fabric of the suit pants is very picky, especially the style that fits her body closely. The 3 rows of buttons are buttoned at the waist, making her waist look particularly thin and elongating the proportions of her body. Her long legs are even more extraordinary when set off by the suit pants and high heels. Wensu rarely looked at someone and froze. Isn't this his beautiful neighbor? The person on the podium hadn't seen him yet, so he just lightly tapped the table to quiet things down a bit. A boy started heckling, "Beauty, can I add you on WeChat?" Luo Lianqing was not angry. Her smile remained unchanged. "Of course you can. I guess we'll be in the same group soon. The heckling from below intensified. She gently gathered the smile on her face and introduced herself. My name is Luo Lianqing. Theoretically, I'm your senior, but I'm also your temporary tutor for this semester. Holy shit, the chance for the beautiful tutor to fall in love with me has come, guys. Luo Yiqing looked in the direction of the voice, her smile unchanged, but her words were tinged with a note of seriousness. Quiet for a moment? I'll tell you the details. It's because your tutor can't come and guide you this semester due to some personal matters, but I will be stricter than your tutor. As she said this, the smile on her face gradually faded, and she seemed to become a little cold. The boys, who had been joking around, slowly lowered their voices. The monitor said at this time, "Be quiet and respect the teacher." Lin Fan, who was standing next to him, nudged Wen-su and whispered, "This new counselor looks pretty, but she has a lot of charisma." But she really is pretty. My sister-in-law, oh, my love. Lin Fan's tone was quite excited, and he emphasized the word pretty twice. Wen-su's eyes twitched, and he looked at Lin Fan, wanting to say something but not knowing whether or not to tell him that this pretty and charismatic counselor was his new neighbor. Luo Yiqing scanned the room with her eyes, and suddenly her pupils constricted as she saw a familiar face. Although it was only a side view, it was clearly the neighbor who had always bumped into her at the community center. Chapter 6. Did he misunderstand something? Luo Yiqing's internal groundhog screamed, but there was no sign of it on her face, except for the slight trembling of her hand holding the list. Miao Miao's words of comfort from yesterday had now vanished like a passing cloud. Help! Why do I keep running into him everywhere, and now he's even become one of my students? Okay, let's start with a roll call, and we can get to know each other at the same time. Actually, I'm not strict normally, and I'm quite easygoing, so you don't need to be nervous. Luo Yiqing smiled as she held the list and said, I just hope that you won't play any pranks. After all, you're all university students, don't you think so? Of course. Teacher, I was wrong, I was just being a smart ass. But are you also in our major, teacher? Luo Yiqing nodded as she listened to their chatter, picking out a few questions to answer. I'm not in your major in college, but I am in the direction of your major in graduate school. I was called in at the last minute to be your tutor for the semester. I hope you can cooperate a little. Roll call begins. Xin Yanran. Lin Fan. Wen-su. Luo Yiqing looked at her neighbor, who raised his hand and said, Here. Wen-su, his name is quite nice, but it's still a bit different from what she remembered. Sure enough, people are similar. Luo Lianqing glanced at Wen-su, then pretended to look away calmly and continued to call the roll. The first day of school is actually just a formality. After all, they are all college students, there is not much to do, and there is no need to hand in homework. Luo Lianqing let out a sigh of relief after going through the process. Okay, everyone, let's disperse, the class meeting is over for today. After she finished speaking, she glanced at Wen-su, thinking of an excuse to stop him. At this time, a boy said, Teacher, can I still add you on WeChat? Luo Lianqing glanced at him and then looked at the monitor next to her. The monitor came over and added him, and then asked me to join the group, you can add him later. As she said this, she noticed that Wen-su was about to leave, so she hurriedly called out, Classmate Wen-su, wait a minute. Everyone in the classroom, who were still there, looked at Wen-su, and then at Luo Lianqing. Xin Yanran, who was originally thinking of a way to ask Wen-su out to dinner, bit her lip lightly and asked in a low voice, Wen-su, do you know the teacher? Wen-su did not answer her question, but looked across the crowd at Luo Lianqing. Luo Yiqing coughed lightly, and said, You're the only one in the class who doesn't live in the dormitory. Come to my office for a moment, I want to get to know the situation. A perfect excuse, Luo Yiqing gave herself a full mark in her heart. Wen-su, who was originally thinking about how to get rid of Xin Yanran, also let out a sigh of relief. Then he told Lin Fan, Don't wait for me, I'll be there in a while. The other people's gazes also shifted away, thinking there was gossip. Xin Yanran followed a few steps behind and asked Wen-su, Can we have lunch together at noon? Wen-su didn't stop walking, saying, It's inconvenient, I don't know when it will be over. After saying that, he nodded to her and walked towards Luo Yiqing. Luo Yiqing's face was calm, but her heart was in turmoil as she walked out of the classroom with Wen-su. Wen-su followed behind her. She was quite tall, and wearing high heels made her look even taller. Wen-su is 183 centimeters tall, and Luo Lianqing, in her high heels, is even taller. No wonder she has such long legs. The two arrived at the office with their own thoughts. Fortunately, the office was empty at the moment. Luo Lianqing let out a sigh of relief and watched Wensu walk in, point to the door, and close it. Wensu stopped by the door, a little hesitant. Teacher, this is not a good idea, a man and a woman alone. In fact, Wensu didn't mean anything when he said this. Luo Yanqing, however, misunderstood instantly. She widened her beautiful eyes, gritted her teeth and lowered her voice, saying, do you think I'm the kind of person? I'm not. Hey, she was a little annoyed and walked over directly. She slammed the office door shut, but didn't lock it. I'm not the kind of person. I bought those things because... Luo Yanqing wanted to explain. After all, she really didn't want her student to misunderstand her as a nymphomaniac, but what had she been doing during the previous few meetings? She got stuck halfway through her explanation. Wensu looked at her face, which was getting redder and redder, and stopped talking. He knew that she was referring to the previous meetings. He let out a small sigh. It was actually quite normal. Teachers were also normal people. No, I didn't take those things to use. Luo Lianqing's composed expression on her face completely collapsed. She stamped her feet a few times in her place, a little annoyed. The sound of her high heels tapping on the floor was very crisp. Wensu found the sight of the girl in front of him, blushing and trying to explain but not knowing how, also very cute. He spoke hesitantly, is this what you wanted to say, teacher? Actually, I didn't really think much about it, it's quite normal. Luo Yuqing didn't know if this person was really stupid or just pretending. Why did they keep bringing this up? In fact, she didn't know what she wanted Wensu to come over for, but the person was already standing here. She could only say dryly, anyway, what happened before was a misunderstanding, so don't mention it again or tell anyone else. After she finished speaking, she felt that her tone was quite bad. Luo Liaoqing let out a breath and just wanted to lower her voice and explain. Wensu, however, glanced at his phone and nodded. I know, teacher, I won't say anything. I won't mention that we met before at school either. Luo Liaoqing's words got stuck in her throat. What did he mean? What's there not to say about having met? Wensu looked at the message from Zhao Baifa and looked a little anxious. Teacher, is it okay if I leave first? Luo Yuqing nodded stiffly, and then she saw Wensu turn around and leave without looking back. His pace was still a little anxious. What? Is he afraid that she can eat him or something? And what did he mean by not saying that they had met? Luo Yuqing always felt that something was wrong. Recalling the conversation between the two of them just now, she realized with hindsight that he might have misunderstood something. Just then a teacher came in and asked, Luo, what did you say? What misunderstanding? Luo Lianqing gave a gentle smile and said, nothing, Miss Wu. Wensu on the other hand really didn't think much of it. In his opinion, they were both adults and it was quite normal to have physiological needs. However, he still felt a bit of regret in his heart that such a pretty girl actually had a boyfriend. But this thought was quickly discarded by him, and it didn't matter to him if he didn't have a boyfriend. He walked directly to the milk tea shop across from the school, where Zhao Li was waiting for him. He said it was urgent. Zhao Li, who was sitting in the corner when Wensu entered, waved. Wensu frowned and walked over. What happened? Zhao Li asked him to sit down mysteriously. Wensu glanced around. There weren't too many people, but it wasn't a good place for a conversation. But he still sat down. Why? Nothing, I actually have the day off today, and I want you to show me around the school and see if there are any pretty schoolgirls. Zhao Li said with a smile. Wensu looked at him expressionlessly, clenching the phone in his hand. Zhao Li, do you want a beating? Chapter 7, is this, avoiding her? Zhao Li saw that he seemed to be really angry, so he quickly said, no, I was just joking. I really have something to do, so can we talk while walking? Wensu looked at him suspiciously and repeated, I started school today. When he first joined the special department, Wensu had just become an adult, but it was agreed that he could not be disturbed while at school unless it was something very important. Uncle Shou is a man who values talent, and he agreed to it quite well at the beginning. He also kept his word, and after 3 years of school, he only bothered him twice. However, Wensu's face didn't look good when he thought about those two memories. Zhao Li kept saying, I know, this is also an emergency. Wensu saw that someone was already looking over, so he had no choice but to stand up and walk out the door with Zhao Li towards the school across the street. Zhao Li, while scrolling through his phone, said with some helplessness, You're a computer genius, so why are you studying business administration? Wensu looked at him and asked, "Do you know why Xiaoming's grandfather lived to be 99? Jolly didn't react for a moment and asked, "Why?" "Because he didn't meddle in other people's business." Wensu sighed inwardly as he saw several classmates walking towards them. "This school is so big, why do I always run into people I know?" Sure enough, Wang Meng and Qin Yanran also saw Wensu. "Wensu, aren't you in the teacher's office?" Qin Yanran's eyes lit up, and she took a few steps to Wensu's front, then looked at Jolly next to him, who obviously wasn't a student. In fact, this question went a bit too far, and Wensu frowned slightly. He really didn't like people who had no sense of propriety, so his tone was relatively indifferent. "My friends, if you have something to do, go ahead, I'll show him around the school." The obvious coldness in his tone was heard by everyone. Wang Meng glanced at him. "Is Brother Su in a bad mood? His tone is a bit harsh." This remark really made him angry. Jolly didn't say a word, just looked on. As expected, Wensu's already bad mood was made even worse by the interruption during school. He gave Wang Meng a cold look. "So what attitude should I have? Bowing and scraping and laughing with you guys?" This remark made Wang Meng's face flash with embarrassment. He had previously relied on his thick skin to chase after his girlfriend, and now people still say he's a toady. Although he didn't mind on the surface, he was quite offended in his heart. He glanced at his girlfriend by the side and saw that she was staring at Wensu, which made him even more unhappy. Just as he was about to speak, the man next to Wensu laughed and said, "Ha, you are all Wensu's classmates. I am his neighbor's brother. I happened to pass by here and asked him to come along for a stroll. You guys go ahead and have fun," he said and pulled Wensu away. The remaining few people stood and watched them walk away. One boy said, "Wensu doesn't seem to be in a good mood. He's just pretending to be cool." Wang Meng gave a disgusted face and said, "Bah." His girlfriend stood a little further away with some disdain. "Can you stop acting like a scoundrel? No one has offended you, and you're talking in a strange voice," he said, taking Qin Yanran's hand. "Let's go." The mocking gazes of the other students fell on Wang Meng, as if they were invisible. This guy had relied solely on shamelessness to get his girlfriend in the first place. Who didn't know that Wenwen was chasing Wenwen at the time, and he was really cheeky? Zhao glanced back at the group of students. "No, if you don't want to socialize, why do you insist on going to school? Where do I not want to? So what's the matter, hurry up," Wensu said with a hiss. Jolly thought to himself, "I can tell just by looking at you that you don't want to talk to people," but he didn't dare to contradict the big guy, so he took out his phone, which had a red dot on it, indicating that the big guy was nearby. "You fixed your location here and won't move." Wensu took his phone and glanced at it. The location of the red dot was right in their school. He frowned. "Is this the stronghold you were looking for before?" "Yes, we followed the person who was going to make contact and watched him enter the school, and this thing is now in your lab." Jolly had a headache and took back the phone and clicked on a photo. It was a profile picture. The old man was very old, but you could still make out his features. Wensu had even seen him on the professor's honor wall. He didn't think that someone with so many honors would be a spy? And Jolly said that the thing they were taken away was still in their school's lab? So what? Wensu looked at him. Jolly shrugged, "So I came to see. We have already started preparing to close the net on our side. We have already brought back the fish and the bait. So far, there is only one fish. Uncle Ugly means to wait." "Wait, isn't this thing supposed to last for a month without failing?" This locator was custom made with a special material. After a month, everything inside will completely fail and dissolve. It's a novelty that Wensu and the special management department came up with. Wensu nodded. "Then you still have more than half a month. So we have to take turns spending the next month here. How boring. I'll come find you and hang out on campus." Zhao Li sighed. "I didn't take that professor's class, otherwise I would have gone to his class just to hang out." Wensu was speechless. "Isn't this still nothing? I thought it was urgent. But I really didn't expect them to bring something into the school, and an old professor at that. It's actually quite scary to think about, a spy masquerading as a professor. They still only just noticed now. It can only be said that beneath the appearance of a peaceful country is also full of crises." Wensu and Zhao Li were walking when they suddenly heard him let out a sigh, "Our fish." Wensu looked up and sure enough saw the old professor, accompanied by several other people. Wasn't the one in the back their tutor? He suddenly thought of something. Does it mean that everyone they come into contact with will be investigated? Routine operation, but this time the professor is in for a busy time. Zhao Li's voice was very quiet. He saw the old professor in front of him wave to the several people before turning and walking away. Zhao Li made a sound of disgust. Could it be that they were all his students? No, Wen-su retorted without thinking. Zhao Li was a little surprised and looked at him, wondering why he said that. Wen-su's gaze remained fixed on Luo Yuqing, who was bowing her head to reply to a message. Since one of them was our senior and also our tutor, she doesn't study chemistry. Zhao Li let out a "oh" and looked up. Senior sister, the prettiest one? As soon as he finished speaking, he felt the prettiest girl looking up at him. She had a slightly surprised expression on her face. Wen-su was a little embarrassed, reached out and covered Zhao Li's face, and turned his head as he pressed it. Luo Yiqing, who was dumbfounded, stood there looking at the distant Wen-su, who suddenly reached out and covered the face of the person next to him, turned around, and walked away. Is this hiding from her? Didn't they just stare at themselves? She felt it. What's there to hide? Chapter 8, many people are chasing after him. Just as Zhao Li said, he really did go with Wen-su for a stroll around the school. After all, Wen-su was not responsible for this. This time, the main reason for coming to see Wen-su was that Uncle Ugly was afraid that Wen-su would have any contact with the other party, so he asked Zhao Li to talk to him about it. Although Wen-su has always been well protected, Uncle Ugly treats him like a precious gem, so he is always paying close attention, afraid of any accidents. Zhao Li was a little sour when he said goodbye to Wen-su. It felt like you were born by Uncle Ugly, and we were all adopted. Wen-su looked up at him, probably because I rarely get into trouble. Zhao Li coughed nervously. Then I felt my phone vibrate a little. Wen-su waved his hand directly and sent you the address of a nearby delicious takeaway. I'm leaving. Zhao Li let out a sigh. Aren't you going to invite me to dinner? You're busy, and I'll cook when I get home. Wen-su left without another word. Zhao Li was speechless and cursed. That's a good point. I'm only good for takeout. Wen-su glanced at the time. It was still early, so he could go to the supermarket and buy some ingredients. He opened WeChat and saw that there were quite a few messages that he hadn't replied to yet, and there was also a new friend request. Wen-su glanced at the messages first. They were all from Qin Yanran, and he felt a little helpless. He was not stupid and of course knew that Qin Yanran had a crush on him, but she was unlike the other girls who had confessed their feelings or hinted at it. She never said anything, just a few words of concern now and then. Wen-su wanted to reject her, but felt that he was being self-absorbed. Besides occasionally crossing the line, Qin Yanran was usually a girl with a sense of propriety and was not annoying. The main reason was that Wen-su had rejected her many times, both explicitly and implicitly. The girl didn't know if she was stubborn or what, but she just seemed to be fine with it. So Wen-su didn't reply to her message and clicked on the new friend request. It said, Luo Yanqing. He froze for a moment, then clicked on accept. The page displayed a system dialog saying that they were already friends and could start chatting. There was no message from the other side, and Wen-su didn't initiate one. Instead, he couldn't help but tap on the other person's profile picture, which was a cute kitten. He felt that this action was not very good in hindsight. In the end, he turned off his phone, put it away, and went directly to the supermarket to buy ingredients. This supermarket is located downstairs in the residential area, and it is usually quite busy in the morning, but actually quite empty near noon. Therefore, Wen-su, who was surrounded by so few people, immediately saw Luo Yanqing who was checking out. In fact, it is quite normal to meet someone from the same residential area. But for some reason, Wen-su felt a little guilty. At this moment, Luo Yanqing looked up sensitively. It's him again? She didn't know what expression to show for a moment. Luo Yanqing should have gone back home. She had changed her clothes into home clothes, let her hair down, casually put on a pair of white sports shoes, and removed her makeup, looking a little more innocent. Once Adam's apple moved up and down a little, but he still chose to walk over. He walked over to the self-checkout machine next to Luo Yuqing. I don't know if this happens to other people, but when you encounter someone you're not familiar with, you want to avoid them, but they happen to see you. You don't want to say hello, but you're forced to smile and say hello, which is so embarrassing. Teacher. Wen-su had just opened his mouth when he was interrupted by Luo Yuqing. Compared to that, I prefer it when you call me senior sister, it makes me seem less old. She said, glancing at Wen-su's shopping cart. She was a little surprised to see the ingredients. You can cook? Her tone sounded quite natural, but in fact Luo Lianqing's heart was beating a little fast, and she was putting on an act. The main reason was that she really wanted the previous incident to be completely over, so every time there was an awkward moment, it was not good. Just try to be as natural as possible, and everything will be fine. Just ordinary neighbors. Ordinary teacher and student. Ordinary senior and junior relationship. Luo Lianqing's eyes flashed, and she felt a little conflicted. When she thought about it like this, their relationship was quite complicated. Wen So saw her natural appearance and felt relieved. Yes, I can cook. He started to prepare the bill with nimble hands and feet. Luo Lianqing had already packed the bag. Wen So glanced at it and saw that it was mostly filled with yogurt snacks and the like. I'll go first, bye. Luo Lianqing nodded slightly. Wen So also nodded and took out his phone to say goodbye. It was just that when Luo Lianqing walked past, she just saw him unlock his phone, and her own avatar appeared on the phone screen, enlarged. Wen So's movements froze, and Luo Yueqing's footsteps paused for a moment. The air seemed to be full of embarrassment. In the end, Wen So heard the sound of Luo Yueqing's footsteps getting further away. He looked down at his phone, his face expressionless. In the end, he let out a breath, tapped on his WeChat wallet, and said, "It's just a social death, it's okay, I don't know him anyway." In the end, Wen So walked away expressionlessly with his things. Luo Yueqing just walked out of the supermarket, back to the community, and got on the elevator. The elevator was empty, so she took out her phone and clicked on her WeChat profile picture. It was her cat, nothing strange. It was no exaggeration to say that she had conditioned herself to death because she had died so many times in front of Wen So. She almost thought that there was something strange about her profile picture that made her die. She clicked into her circle of friends again, and it was fine, nothing strange. After checking, she realized with hindsight that she had been a little too nervous. At the same time, she was a little puzzled by the fact that she had added Wen So's WeChat after being stimulated by what she had just seen at school, or Wen So had just run away. Luo Yueqing's face was full of annoyance, and she was still a little red. Are you sick? Isn't it embarrassing enough? The elevator arrived, and she sighed as she got out. It's fine, they don't see each other often anyway. And judging from Wen So's reaction, he doesn't want to see her often either, which is good. So Wen So found that after he had added Luo Yueqing as a friend, he hadn't seen her or had any contact with her. When he reacted, it was already a week later. Lin Fan vented to him, "Wen, our tutor, is so hard to add. I can't see his circle of friends even after adding him, he's so aloof." Wen So was filling out a form at the time. They had a basketball match with another department in a couple of days, and Lin Fan had dragged him along. Hearing Lin Fan's words, Wen So finally remembered that Luo Lianqing seemed to have posted in her circle of friends the other day. Lin Fan saw that he didn't react and didn't expect it. He lowered his voice and said, "Let me tell you, that Zhou Qi in our class, remember, seems to be chasing the counselor." Wen So looked up at him and said, "Is teacher-student love allowed at school?" This isn't called teacher-student love either. Luo Yueqing only replaced her for one semester, essentially she is our senior. Lin Fan thought for a moment and said, "She is chased by many people, and I also know that she didn't study at our school for her undergraduate degree. I don't know why she came to our school for graduate school." Chapter 9, I like long legs. Wen So looked at him and asked, "Where did she study before?" "It seems like she studied abroad, and what she studied was related to art. I heard them talking about it before." Lin Fan thought about it for a moment, a little puzzled. Studying art and suddenly studying management, it was a bit strange. Wen So also felt quite strange. He handed Lin Fan the completed form, writing. Lin Fan let out a heh and said, "Okay, buddy, you play so well, but you don't play often." Wen So laughed a little and didn't say anything. In fact, if Lin Fan hadn't accidentally seen him playing alone before, he really wouldn't have known that Wen So played so well. You're handsome and you play well, why don't you like to show off? Otherwise, you would definitely be single. Lin Fan was still chatting away when he suddenly thought of something, but he felt that if you weren't single, it was because you didn't want to be, unlike someone like me who has no one. Lin Fan is a bit of a chatterbox. He can usually come up with 10 sentences, and Wen So can reply with one, and he doesn't feel bored. In the end, someone came to Lin Fan to talk about the basketball game, and Wen So was able to safely escape from the noise of the BB machine. It was just a short while after he had walked out of the classroom door when someone called out to him, "Wen So." Wen So sighed and turned his head to take a look, and sure enough, it was Qin Yanran. She ran up 2 steps and handed him a bottle of yogurt. Do you want some? No thanks. Wen-su whispered. Xin Yanran withdrew her hand, stared at him, and suddenly asked, Do you hate me? At this time, they were standing at the corner of a staircase, with no one around. Wen-su was a little embarrassed. The scene he was most afraid of had happened after all. No, I just. Then if you don't hate me, why do you keep avoiding me? Xin Yanran didn't let him finish his sentence. Her beautiful puppy dog eyes were full of grievances. You should be able to tell that I like you, right? Wen-su let out a breath, his tone helpless. Then you should be able to tell that I actually don't want to get involved in a relationship, right? He didn't put it in a harsh way. But Xin Yanran still had reddened eyes. Why? Is it because I did something wrong? No, it's just that I feel important when I like this kind of thing. Wen-su was afraid that she was going to cry. This was really embarrassing. Don't think about it too much. It's hard not to think about it when it's so dry. Luo Yanqing, who was standing at the corner of the stairs, felt a little embarrassed. She had just been here. It was she who had told Lin Fan and the others to hand in the forms early for the basketball match. After she had finished talking, she came out and didn't walk for a few steps, and the lace of her shoe came off. She walked over to the side and just wanted to fix it. But then this happened. Now she was going out, how embarrassing. And hearing Wen-su's voice, she didn't know why she didn't want to go out anymore. I didn't realize that he was quite popular. Xin Yanran is quite good looking. Don't you like my type? I can change my style. Xin Yanran took a deep breath, holding back the tears that she wanted to shed. I can become the style you like. Nowadays, girls' styles are all changeable, I can do it. After she finished speaking, she looked at Wen-su with a face full of tears. Wen-su was frantic in his heart. He really didn't know how to deal with this kind of situation. Most girls who were rejected would just walk away embarrassed. But there are really not many like Xin Yanran who insist on asking for a reason. It's either a matter of style or people have their own preferences. You're not my type. Wen-su sighed. Quite a few boys in the class like you. Or you can just like someone else. Wen-su prayed that she wouldn't ask anymore. He had already made himself clear, and there was nothing more he could say if she kept asking. So what type do you like? Xin Yanran obviously hadn't heard his inner prayer, and she was in a frame of mind to get to the bottom of it. Luo Yuqing, who was around the corner, didn't really mean to eavesdrop, but she still attracted attention. Wen-su looked at the relatively petite Xin Yanran in front of him and opened his mouth to say, I like long legs. Xin Yanran, Luo Yuqing. The two of them glanced at their legs at the same time. Xin Yanran's tears fell directly. Luo Yuqing's first reaction was, my legs are quite long. Then she just wanted to shake her head to clear her mind. What did she have to do with it? Wen-su saw that she was really crying and was a little troubled. Don't cry, it's really not your problem. I'm sorry. Xin Yanran sniffed and said, really, don't you want to consider me? My legs aren't long, but I have pretty big breasts. Wen-su was a little embarrassed and didn't dare to look at her. You like Miss Luo's kind of person, don't you? Xin Yanran continued, legs are long, waist is thin, breasts are big, and she's pretty. She spoke in a continuous stream, completely denying Wen-su the opportunity to interrupt. On the other hand, Luo Liqing couldn't help but touch her waist and glance at her breasts. Wen-su just wanted to leave quickly, otherwise it would be very embarrassing when people came. He nodded, most guys like Miss Luo's kind of person, right? So I'm sorry. But there are also a lot of guys who like you. Xin Yanran wasn't comforted, thank you. In the end, she ran away crying. Wen-su let out a sigh of relief, and then looked at the covered side of the corner of the stairs. There was someone there, and he had just noticed. But the other person didn't come out, and Xin Yanran came and went and said a whole bunch of things, so he didn't get a chance to say anything. Wen-su hesitated for a moment, but then walked over. He was afraid that if the news that he liked Teacher Lu spread, it would be embarrassing. But Wen-su didn't expect to see Luo Yuqing standing there with the same embarrassed expression. Her face was still a little red. When she saw Wen-su approaching, her eyes widened, full of embarrassment and shyness. Wen-su. What kind of embarrassment is this? Can I return it? Teacher. He spoke hesitantly, just now. I didn't mean to, I was just crouching here tying my shoelaces, and as soon as you guys came, you started talking all at once, and I was afraid that if I went out, it would be even more embarrassing. Luo Yiqing preempted him, afraid that he would think he was eavesdropping. Wensu sighed. I know, I didn't mean it. Just don't take what I just said seriously. I was just trying to spare her embarrassment. Luo Yiqing. Don't take it seriously? Which part? She looked at the somewhat embarrassed Wensu in front of her and suddenly remembered a few of her previous social deaths, which made her afraid to face Wensu to this day. At this time, seeing him so rarely embarrassed, it seemed that his ears were still a little red. Her heart stirred, and she suddenly leaned in a little, as if on purpose. There was more teasing laughter in those eyes. Was it a question of whether you like long legs or admit to liking me? Wensu felt a burst of fragrance, and without thinking, he took a small step back. Looking at the beautiful face that had leaned in close, his Adam's apple uncontrollably moved up and down. Chapter 10. So this kid likes the domineering type of Miss Luo too. Wensu quickly looked away. Teacher, I actually just said that because Qin Yanran kept asking. Luo Lianqing gave a mental seal of approval. Finally, there was a reaction. Apart from the previous incident of picking up the wrong delivery, these few meetings were the first time she had seen him visibly emotional. This instantly boosted Luo Lianqing's morale. How could she be the only one to be socially awkward? Oh? I thought you were serious. She wore a short skirt and white sneakers today, and the entire exposed part of her leg was white and tender, and also exceptionally long. She stretched her leg out in front of Wenza, her tone deliberately curious. Is my leg not long enough? Don't you like it? Wenza reflexively glanced at it. It's long, it's white, it's very pretty. Or is it that I don't have a thin waist? My breasts. She said with a hint of annoyance. I'm only 2 years older than you, so I might still be growing. Teacher. Wensu couldn't hold back anymore, and his voice slightly increased. I'm sorry, I didn't know you were here. I didn't mean to offend you, but I really didn't mean that. His tone was a little hesitant. It doesn't seem appropriate to discuss this in our relationship here. Maybe somewhere else. Wensu was shocked by the thought that flashed through his mind. Luo Yiqing saw that not only his ears had turned red, but now his face was beginning to blush as well. She was a little satisfied. She still leaned over a little, and the distance between the two of them closed a lot. Wensu discovered that she was not wearing high heels and probably reached his collarbone. This position only required him to lower his head to kiss her. Wensu's eyes became a little deeper, and he looked at her pink little mouth and moved it. His voice was very low. Let's call it even. You don't mention what happened before, and I won't mention this time when you said you like me. Wensu suddenly became a little sober. How come she still remembered what happened before? In fact, he really didn't intend to mention it again. No wonder she seemed so awkward every time they met. Wensu's gaze moved from those pink lips to those beautiful eyes. He suddenly smiled and reached up to take off his glasses. This action made Luo Lianqing freeze for a moment. Without the obstruction of the glasses, she could clearly see Wensu's eyes. They were very gentle eyes. Wensu laughed softly while she was distracted. Okay, deal. He never mentioned the excuse that he had just made, which was just to get rid of Qin Yanran quickly. Although he had a deep impression of Luo Lianqing, she was indeed his type, especially because she had really beautiful legs. However, Wensu had never felt anything else for her since they first met. It might be a bit excessive to pay attention to her, but it's still within the normal range. There's really nothing else. It's just that at this moment, Wensu felt a sense of relief when he saw Luo Lianqing, and he also felt relieved. That's good, then I'll go back. See you again, Wensu. Luo Lianqing smiled at him, turned around, and walked away humming a song. Wensu squinted his eyes as he pinched the legs of his glasses and watched her slowly walk down the stairs. He was visibly happy. He glanced at his glasses and reached out to touch them. Looking through them, she actually looked a little blurry. Just as he was thinking that, he heard footsteps coming from not far away, so Wensu put his glasses back on. Lin Fan and Lu Shuma walked over, not expecting to see Wensu at first glance, and quickly called out to him, Xiaowen. Wensu looked over, huh? Lin Fan gave a disgusted sound and ran over to him, punching him. Did you make Qin Yanran cry? Why do you ask? Wensu's mind was still flashing with Luo Yanqing's face just now, as well as that beautiful leg, and he looked at Lin Fan when he heard what he said. Lu Shumu also walked over, just crying and going back, and her friends were all around asking. She didn't say anything, but one of her roommates seemed to say that she saw her chasing you out. She said that and looked at him, and now that she's looking at you here, I guess it has something to do with you, more or less? Wen-sun nodded and turned to go downstairs. It's nothing, we just talked about my type. Lin Fan and Lu Shumu were stunned, looked at each other, and then chased after him. It's not Xiao Wen, what's your type? Anyway, it's not Qin Yanran's type. No, and I haven't seen you like anyone either. It's not a loss to try with Qin Yanran, she's pretty. Lin Fan whispered, before a few guys in our class didn't even get a chance to chase after her. Lu Shumu nodded, too. Maybe time will grow feelings. Hey, Lin Fan looked like he understood in a second. Wood, you kid, you know how to use adjectives. The two of them exchanged a lewd glance. Wen-so, on the other hand, just looked at them and said, you guys, don't joke like that. Lin Fan sighed. Little buddy of justice, we'll just mouth sex in front of you, but seriously, Qin Yanran is really not bad. Recently, the forums have been voting for the department flower and school flower, and she's been pretty popular. Wen-so shook his head, that won't do, it's not good for anyone if you don't try when you don't have feelings in a relationship. He really is a pure-hearted young man. Lin Fan sighed exaggeratedly. Lu Shumu, on the other hand, thought of something else. Recently, Wang Meng has been canvassing votes for his girlfriend. Huh? His girlfriend is actually just SOSO, how can she be on the list? Wen-so didn't pay much attention as he listened to them whispering about this. Then he heard Lin Fan say that it still has to be Teacher Luo, by a long shot. Wen-so turned his head and looked at him, then looked at the page of the school forum on his phone. The first photo was of Luo Lianqing. His gaze paused for a moment on the long legs and black stockings in the photo. They were really beautiful. Lin Fan saw him looking at the screen of his phone and simply turned it around and held it in front of him. Isn't Teacher Luo beautiful? This seems to be a photo taken when she attended some meeting before. Although it's not very clear, the proportions of her body, her legs, are absolutely amazing, guys. Wen-so rarely agreed. Although the picture was blurry, he could still see that the proportions of her body were very good. When Wen-so finally said goodbye to them, Lin Fan reminded him to remember to vote for my goddess on the forum. Wen-so froze for a moment, who is your goddess? Lu Shumu rolled his eyes, basically more than half of the boys' goddess, our Teacher Luo. Lin Fan nodded directly, still looking righteous, and said, who doesn't like Teacher Lu if they like older sisters? Wen-so thought about the delicate little face that just came over to him, and those beautiful legs. He nodded very honestly. Then he said goodbye to them and turned to leave. Lin Fan, who had stayed in place, came back to his senses after a while. No, Wood. Did Xiao Wen just nod? Lu Shumu nodded. Holy shit? I always thought he was going to become a monk. It turns out that this kid also likes the type of woman that Teacher Luo likes. Chapter 11, Cookies. Wen-so went straight back to the apartment, and before entering the door, he glanced across the street, naturally seeing nothing. After entering the room, he sat on the sofa and opened the website address of the school forum. Sure enough, the first post was the one Lin Fan and the others had been talking about, the one about choosing the school flower and department flower. He clicked in, and a voting link loaded up. The first one was Luo Qingqing. The difference in votes between her and the second place was almost 2,000. Wen-so dragged it down and saw the photo. It was indeed very blurry, but he clicked on it anyway. The photo showed Luo Qingqing wearing a white shirt and a dress with a formal collar, with black stockings, standing in front of a multimedia device. The angle of the photo was probably taken secretly, and the person taking it was probably not very skilled, as it looked more like a shot from above. Luckily, Luo Yuqing is good looking, and her legs have a really good proportion, so it still looks good even if it's taken this way. There are a few more pictures of her below, but they're mostly candid shots and not very clear. Wen-so let out a sound of disgust. If someone else were photographed like this, it really wouldn't look good. There were a lot of comments below, so Wen-so glanced through them. He learned that Luo Yuqing was really only 2 years older than himself, and that she had previously studied art design for her undergraduate degree abroad, but for some reason, she suddenly returned to China for her graduate studies to study business administration. There wasn't much information about her, except that she had a very good temper. She had many suitors, but none had succeeded so far. Many people still called her Luoshin in the comments. Wen-so felt bored after a while. He clicked on the poll and then logged out. He was originally considering what to do. The junior year curriculum was really a lot easier, and some people in the class had even started applying for internships. Generally speaking, the tutors would approve. Wence's excuse for moving out was also finding an internship, and Wang Meng had even asked him what he was doing before. But Wence's excuse was very vague, just saying that the working hours were very relaxed, so it would not affect going back to school. Wence still really enjoyed the feeling of being at school. After all, after graduation, social animals would work for decades, and just thinking about it would make you crumble. Wence sighed and clicked on his circle of friends. As a result, the first one was Luo Lianqing's circle of friends. For some reason, she had never blocked him. I guess my sense of existence is too low. Luo Lianqing posted 2 photos, one high resolution and one low resolution. The caption read, "I really want to know who took this picture of me and made me look so ugly. Haha.jip." Wence clicked on the blurry photo, which looked familiar. It was indeed the one from the forum. He scrolled past it. The high-resolution photo showed the same outfit, and those long, beautiful legs caught Wence's eye. In the photo, Luo Lianqing was leaning over, resting one hand on the desk and clicking the mouse with the other. The photographer should have called out to her by now. She turned her head slightly, and there was a smile in her eyes. Due to the clothes and skirt, her legs were straight, making her waist look thin, her legs long, and her buttocks perky. Wence blinked and nodded slightly in respect. In the end, he clicked to dismiss the photo. Seeing that Luo Lianqing's friends did not have any likes or comments from the rest of the class, he thought of what Lin Fan had said, she had blocked everyone in the class. For a moment, Wence hesitated. Should he like it or not? As he hesitated, his finger habitually tapped the screen, and then he saw a bright red little heart. Very good. No need to hesitate. Wence removed his finger expressionlessly, and a second later, he tapped in to cancel the like. Then he put down his phone and walked into the kitchen. At this time, Luo Wuqing, who was separated from Wence by 2 doors and a hallway, had just tapped in, and then noticed that the like had been cancelled. She reached out and covered the mask on her face, smearing the essence all over her hands. She couldn't believe it, so she went out a little and clicked in again, but really it was gone. So Wence liked it and then unliked it? What does that mean? Luo Lianqing was a little speechless. She did block most people because she was not a person who liked to expose her privacy. Wence basically never chatted with her after the two added each other as friends, so at first she really forgot. But just as she was liking Wence's post, she happened to be replying to a friend's message in her circle of friends, and she saw it. For a moment, she didn't remember who he was. She clicked in to take a look. The profile picture was clean, and she only remembered his nickname because it only had one character, W. As a result, she clicked in and then clicked out, and he cancelled? Didn't you like long legs? Are your legs not long? Luo Lianqing clicked on her 2 photos, which were clearly very long. Oomph, you don't know what's good. Luo Lianqing snorted, poking at Wence's dark profile picture. He's just as boring as his profile picture. Then she couldn't help but poke him a few more times. Then her phone vibrated. You patted W. Luo Lianqing. She quickly opened the browser with shaking hands. Can I withdraw the WeChat shake if I accidentally do it? Then she despaired. Damn WeChat, forget it. Why do I always act so socially awkward whenever I meet Wence? Luo Lianqing threw her phone away, covered her face with the mask she was wearing, and walked into the bathroom in despair. Out of sight, out of mind. Maybe he's blind? As it turned out, Wence was not blind. He felt his phone vibrate a few times when he came out with a yogurt. The first thing he saw when he opened it up was a message from Wang Meng, which was indeed soliciting votes for his girlfriend. Wence just glanced at it, and his girlfriend wasn't even in the top 10, and he really insisted on it. He called him his brother over and over, saying that he would treat him to dinner afterwards. Wence typed the message word by word with a blank expression, then sent it. He was already sorry for voting. Wang Meng's reply came quickly. Ha? Who did you vote for? Qin Yanran? Wence didn't reply. His relationship with Wang Meng was never that great. They were about to graduate anyway, and he felt that he would have no more contact with him in the future. Wence saw the sender of the next message. The cat avatar looked familiar, he had just seen it in his circle of friends. Wence clicked on it and found that she had patted herself 3 minutes ago, and then there was no further news. So? Wensu raised an eyebrow and sent a question mark. This time the reply came quickly. Do you like cookies? I baked some cookies this afternoon and gave some to the other neighbors. We live across the street from each other, do you want some? It seemed like a reasonable reason, but Wensu felt that she seemed a little nervous when she read this long message. Okay, is it convenient for me to come over and get them now? Wensu asked. It's convenient, come over, I'll pack it for you. Luo Lianqing replied quickly. She let out a sigh of relief after seeing Wensu's okay expression. She let out a sigh of relief after seeing the cookies that had just been packed. It was a good thing she had baked some cookies this afternoon. It's just that. She looked guiltily at the lazy cat basking in the sun on the balcony. She hoped that Wensu wouldn't find out that she had baked these cookies for Yoke, the cat's name. The ingredients were absolutely fresh, and they were imported. And she had just tried one, and it was delicious. The main thing was that she really couldn't think of any other way to relieve the awkwardness. Help! Chapter 12, It seems her neighbor is also prone to embarrassment. When the knock came, Luo Yueqing and her cat looked in surprise at the door. Wensu knocked 3 times and then stood waiting at the door. Although he felt that Luo Yueqing's sudden offer of cookies was a bit strange. He remembered that when he was a child, his grandparents and neighbors would share their homegrown vegetables with their neighbors. It didn't seem unreasonable. So Wensu didn't think much about it and came over with a small bag of fruit. Don't ask why it was fruit again, because that's the only thing at home that was suitable for visiting someone. The door opened from the inside, and Luo Liaoqing stood behind it holding a small box. After the door opened, the two of them were strangely silent for a moment. In the end, Luo Liaoqing spoke first, pretty quick. Wensu looked up at her and said, it's right across the street, it'll be faster. Then there was silence again. Wensu, has anyone ever told you that you can bore the daylights out of people? Luo Liaoqing sighed a little worriedly. This is the first time I've ever felt like I can't carry on a conversation with someone. Wensu sighed too. I know, that's why I moved out. He looked at Luo Liaoqing, who was wearing her pajamas and looked a little speechless. I'm not very good at small talk, so don't mind me. He paused for a moment, and then said, it seems a bit strange that we're standing here in the doorway like this. Wensu said this originally meaning was that she could give him the cookies in her hand, and then he could go back. But Luo Yueqing seemed to have misunderstood. She looked at him hesitantly, and then asked, do you want to come in and sit down? Wensu. He was thinking about how to refuse when a soft cat meow sounded. Wensu saw a beautiful stuffed cat slowly walk out of the house, come to Luo Yueqing's feet, look up at him. As if out of curiosity, it meowed again at Wensu. Luo Lianqing looked at the cat at her feet as if a little surprised. Wensu looked at the fluffy cat, which looked so soft to the touch, and was tempted. Is its name Yoke? He heard his own voice. Luo Lianqing nodded and said, come in, it's rare to see it like this with someone. Luo Lianqing said, crouched down, picked up the cat with one hand, and took a step into the house. Wensu eventually entered her house with the fruit in his hands, and he couldn't help but ask, you're just letting anyone into your house? Aren't you a neighbor and a student? It's pretty safe. Luo Liaoqing walked towards the living room with the cat in one arm and a small cookie in the other, saying, I studied Sanda. Wensu couldn't help but laugh lightly. If it really wasn't a good person, your Sanda would be useless. Luo Liaoqing looked back at him and said very seriously, you are the first member of the opposite sex to enter this house. Wensu was stunned. He stood there looking at the serious-faced Luo Liaoqing, let out a sound, and then said tentatively, my pleasure? Luo Liaoqing nodded. Indeed, before, when Yoke saw a man, she would just pounce on him. The property management had been scared to death by her. Wensu didn't realize that such a pretty cat could be so violent. At this time, Yoke jumped off Luo Lianqing's body and took a few light steps, circling around Wensu and meowing again. Luo Lianqing put down the box in her hands and saw the small bag in Wensu's hands. Come over and sit down. What are you holding? I brought you some fruit. Wensu walked over to the sofa and sat down while Yoke was eyeing him hungrily. Luo Lianqing reached out and took the bag from him, and their fingers touched unintentionally. Then Wensu moved, and unlike his hot hands, Luo Lianqing's hands were a little cold. Luo Lianqing seemed to have not noticed, reached out and took the bag from him, and whispered, you're too kind, it's a bit strange, I'll wash it for you and eat it. With that, she walked hurriedly towards the kitchen. Wensu always felt that this development was a bit strange. Didn't she just come over to get a biscuit? How did it escalate to this? He sighed, a little nervous. He didn't really know Luo Yiqing well. And every time they met, it was quite awkward. Now sitting in her house was even more awkward. Just as he was thinking, there was a sudden weight on his lap, and the cat called Danwang jumped onto his lap. Then it meowed at him again. Wensu hesitated for a moment, reached out and gently stroked its head. To be honest, petting a cat was really comfortable. Wensu stroked it a little, and couldn't help stroking it again. Yoke seemed quite satisfied with him and narrowed its eyes. Wensu also relaxed a bit. After being petted for a while, Yoke suddenly meowed towards the table. Wensu paused, and there was only the box of biscuits on the table. He whispered, "You shouldn't eat that." Yoke was obviously unhappy with his response, jumped from his lap to the table, and reached out to paw at the box. Wensu quickly reached out to stop him. "Hey, don't move." But Yoke meowed in dissatisfaction again. The sound of water in the kitchen stopped, and Luo Lianqing walked out with some fruit. As soon as she came out, she saw Wensu trying to stop Yoke from pawing at the cookies on the table. Luo Lianqing's eyebrows jumped, and she hurried over to stop him. "Yoke, what are you doing? Those aren't your cookies." Yoke didn't know if he understood what she said, but he meowed at Luo Lianqing angrily, then reached out and patted the cookie box. That action really showed how angry he was. Wensu still found it really cute. He had a poor affinity with small animals, but this was the first time he had seen a kitten actively approach him, so it was inevitable that his gaze at Yoke would be filtered. Luo Liuqing was afraid that Wensu would discover something, and she would only become more embarrassed. So she quickly put down what she was holding, reached out and hugged Yoke, whispering, "Didn't you eat a cookie today?" Yoke broke free from her embrace and jumped into Wensu's arms again. Ignoring her, Luo Liuqing glared at him and scolded, "You little flirt." Wensu's eyes, however, were filled with a smile as he reached out and stroked her silky fur. Luo Lianqing nodded, "Yes, you are indeed. It's just that sometimes she can be a bit too playful, and she's afraid of men. You're probably the first man she's ever actively approached. Is Egg Yolk the cat in your avatar?" Wensu regretted saying this as soon as it came out. Because he thought about the time before at the supermarket when he peeked at someone's avatar and hadn't encountered this awkward situation. Luo Yiqing sat on the sofa opposite him and said with a smile, "Yes." It seemed that she had discovered that her neighbor was easily embarrassed, so she stared at Wensu's face and asked slowly, "Didn't you click to look before? You should be able to recognize it, right?" Sure enough, the person across the way paused for a moment when stroking the cat, and then unnaturally reached up to push his glasses. He looked a little overwhelmed. Chapter 13, so it's not that he doesn't like her type, it's that he doesn't like women? Wensu pushed his glasses up and looked up at her. He saw her smiling, propping her chin up as she stared straight at him. She was very pretty, and Wensu looked at her for a while before averting his gaze. He had accidentally clicked on her last time. That explanation was a bit far-fetched. Luckily, Luo Lianqing probably just wanted to tease him a little, so she let out a soft "oh." Just as Wensu felt a slight relief in his heart, he heard a soft sound from the other side. Was that praise just now also an accident? Wensu. So she's not going to let up on herself because she was too rude before? Luo Yiqing had figured out a way to get along with Wensu, as long as she wasn't embarrassed, Wensu would be. It seemed like he really didn't know how to get along with people. If that was the case, she wasn't at all panicked. Luo Yiqing lightly tossed out the question and then just looked at Wensu. The room fell into silence. The egg yolk seemed to be bored and jumped off Wensu's lap and ran away on its own. Wensu let out a breath and looked at Luo Yiqing, who had no intention of letting him off the hook. "Why did you cancel it?" Luo Yiqing asked with a raised eyebrow. She pushed the fruit towards Wensu and said, "Don't be nervous, I was just asking casually." Wensu looked at her with a pleading expression. "Can I not answer?" "No, I'm really curious." Luo Yiqing shook her head. "Is it not good looking?" She glanced at her legs, and shouldn't it be? Wensu also glanced at her legs with her movement, and then quickly averted his gaze. In fact, it was still cold, and she was wearing long trousers, so it was hard to tell. But in Wensu's mind, the pair of long legs in black silk that he had seen not long ago flashed through his mind. He moved, slightly changing his sitting position. "It's good looking, very pretty." Wensu's voice was a little dry. Luo Lianqing didn't think much of it, but she was still a little happy inside. "Then why did you cancel?" "I just didn't feel like I knew you well enough, and I was afraid that you might not feel comfortable with this like. After all, you should have blocked most of the people in my class, and I should have been the one you missed blocking, which means that you probably wouldn't want your students to see it. Wensu spoke at a moderate pace, and after he finished, he looked at her again. You really mind that I cancelled? Wensu said, took out his phone, opened his circle of friends in front of her, and then gave a like. Finally, he looked up at her and said, is this okay now? As expected, only magic can defeat magic. Luo Lianqing, who had originally done it on purpose, suddenly felt that her actions just now were a bit childish when she watched his neat and clean actions. She leaned back on the sofa, coughed lightly, and said, I was just teasing you. Just as she said this, she saw Yoke walking over with a small cookie in its mouth, jumping back onto Wensu's lap, and then placing the cookie by his hand. Luo Yueqing's hands were shaking a little. She sat up straight, wanting to reach out and take it. Yoke, are you dirty? But Wensu had already picked up the cookie and placed it near Yoke's mouth. Yoke is not dirty. Luo Lianqing's eyelids twitched, she took a deep breath, looked at the small cookie in the box, and thought about changing it for one from the supermarket. Just as she was thinking, Wensu's phone rang, and Yoke immediately jumped down and ran away in fright. Wensu let out a hey, looked at Luo Lianqing apologetically, and said, I'm sorry, did Yoke scare you? As he said this, he glanced at his phone and saw that it was Zhao Li again. Luo Lianqing saw him frown and waved his hand, saying, it's fine, you go ahead if you have something to do. Wensu stood up and nodded, then I'll go back first. Luo Liaoqing also stood up, slightly relieved, hoping that he had already forgotten about the cookies and would go back. Wensu nodded, then reached out and took the box on the table, and said to Luo Liaoqing, thank you for the cookies, the yolks are very cute. Luo Liaoqing's face stiffened a little, and she nodded and said, thank you. Wensu was silent for a moment, but still said, you're also very pretty, goodbye. Then he turned and walked away. Luo Liaoqing stood still, blinked, and heard the sound of the door closing gently. I know I look good. She let out a breath, looked in the direction that Yoke had just run off to, and said, Yoke. You're such a good sister. Come out here. Wensu stood in the doorway and answered Zhao Li's call. Hello? Su, are you home? Come up for dinner. Zhao Li's voice came through, a little tired. Wensu frowned. You have time to come to dinner? Yes, the case was taken over by the Special Management Office, and we suddenly have time. Zhao Li said suddenly, fuck, after following it for so long, suddenly the department was changed. Wensu's face also flashed with displeasure when he heard this. So suddenly? Tisk, it's hard to explain over the phone. I'm downstairs in your neighborhood. I'll come up now. You're home, right? Zhao Li let out a breath. I have to register in the community. Yes, 808A, Building 5. You can come up. Wensu sighed, opened the door to his apartment, and looked at the small box of cookies in his hand. His expression relaxed a little. Zhao Li on the other end of the line hung up the phone quickly. Wensu had wanted to take out the cookies, but in the end he hesitated. He put the cookies aside, took out the snacks from the supermarket, washed some fruit, and carried it to the living room outside. As for the cookies, there shouldn't be much, so he didn't want Zhao Li to waste them. There was a knock on the door. Wensu opened the door and saw Zhao Li, who was carrying groceries and standing at the door looking exhausted. Seeing Wensu bury his face in Zhao Li's shoulder without warning, Luo Yueqing, who was opening the door and holding a delivery box, came out. Her gaze flickered back and forth between the two of them. In the end, it met Wensu's eyes, and her face was full of shock. Then she saw Wensu push away the man who was leaning over with some disgust and look at her. Going out? Ah. Luo Lianqing withdrew her gaze, I'll go throw out the trash. She nodded with a smile, you guys go ahead. Zhao Li turned his head and saw her and was a little surprised. He raised a bright smile and said hello, teacher. Wensu was disgusted with him, pushed him a little and pushed him towards the house, come in. Then he nodded to Luo Lianqing, you go ahead, I'll greet my friends first. Luo Lianqing nodded. Then she watched the door close in front of her. A thoughtful expression flashed across her face. She had long legs. No wonder I didn't think she was pretty. So it wasn't that I didn't like her type, it was that I didn't like girls? She looked down at the egg yolk that had just grazed her foot. Chapter 14, Let's talk sometime. Wensu looked at Zhao Li, who was still looking out curiously after the door closed, a little speechless. What's wrong with you? No, what's wrong with me? Zhao Li was also speechless, and then he saw your teacher saying hello. Your tutor is beautiful even without makeup. He said this and then hit Wensu playfully. How old are you? Do you have a girlfriend? Wensu looked up at him when he heard this, his eyes cold, but Zhao Li somehow sensed the murderous intent in them. He hesitated and took a step back, his voice also getting a little lower. What's wrong? Wensu said he couldn't explain, but he was upset anyway. He looked away slightly. Do you have time? Why do you care so much about other people? No, I don't have time. I also want to get a girlfriend. If this is a case of a man who is not married and a woman who is not married. His voice suddenly broke off, and he let out a sigh. Hey, Wen, you're not upset because I asked your counselor, are you? Zhao Li's tone was a bit exaggerated, as if he couldn't believe it. He walked a few steps next to Wensu and asked, do you like it? Wensu didn't stop walking, carrying the food he was given to the kitchen. Why are you so talkative? I just couldn't hold it in anymore, so I came to you to talk it out. Talking, you know? Just to chat. Zhao Li followed him into the kitchen. Don't change the subject. I'm a professional. This reaction of yours is very inappropriate. After all, we've been partners for 3 years. Wensu ignored him. He just felt that Zhao Li was particularly annoying today. But like? His gaze fell on the box he had set aside, and Luo Lianqing's face flashed through his mind. He couldn't say he liked her, but she was definitely his type. Wensu took out the food from the bag. It had been so many years, and for the first time, he had met someone who exactly matched his type, so it was inevitable that he would pay a little more attention. Not to mention that she looked a little like someone he knew. Zhao Li sighed after saying a bunch of things about people who didn't respond to his discoveries. In the end, he concluded, if you like her, go for it. But you counselors don't lack suitors, and you have the advantage of living right across the hall. That's enough, are you going to eat or not? Wensu snorted, there are snacks and fruit outside, go sit and wait. I mainly came to vent, there's not enough time for dinner, I'll wait here for you, you do the work and I'll do the talking, we won't get in each other's way. Zhao Li spoke clearly and logically. A big part of the reason he and Wensu became friends was because he understood people like Wensu who were close to autistic children. The reason he confided in him was that, firstly, he could tell him about these things. Secondly, Wensu only listened, and basically never spoke, just giving him some basic responses. That was enough. Zhao Li leaned over and caught a whiff of the aroma. He looked around a few times, his gaze settling on a cardboard box. You bought it? He said, reaching out to take it. Wensu noticed and tried to stop him, but it felt a bit strange to do so. He just watched as Zhao Li opened the box and took a small cookie and put it in his mouth. It was just baked, right? It's quite crispy, but the taste is a bit bland, and it doesn't feel like it has any butter or anything. Wensu suddenly reached out and took out a cookie, his hand was still a bit wet. Zhao Li let out a cry, and some drips got in. You called me. Wensu looked at the cat claw-shaped cookie in his hand and suddenly smiled. Zhao Li. Why are you smiling after eating a cookie? Wensu was sure that this cookie was the same as the one he had just fed the egg yolk to. The size, shape, and smell were all similar. Then he thought about Luo Lianqing's performance just now. Wensu suddenly reached over and took the box from Zhao Li's hand. Don't eat it, there are butter cookies outside, go out and eat if you're hungry. Hey, why are you like this, the freshly baked ones smell so good. Zhao Li didn't understand, feeling that Wensu was acting strangely today and was unwilling to even let him have a box of cookies. He suddenly thought of something. No, you don't have an oven at home. If you went to the supermarket to buy butter cookies, why would there still be freshly baked cookies? And you just dressed up, so you should have been at home the whole time. His eyes suddenly lit up. So this cookie was given to you by someone else? There are only 2 households on the first floor of your apartment building, so it was given to you by your neighbor? Zhao Li let out a yelp. You were given it by your counselor? I get it. He patted Wanza on the shoulder and said with a smile, hang in there. Oh, I'm going out to get some butter cookies, so I won't touch yours. Don't be mad. Wanza listened to him ramble on, then went out with confidence. But he had to say, his guesses were basically all correct. It's just that he might have misunderstood that Wanza wasn't reluctant to give it to him, but couldn't bear to see him fight with the egg yolk over it. Wanza sighed, but it's better to feed it to the egg yolk than to you. It's true that he didn't really want to give it to Zhao Li. He hesitated for a moment, but then he put the cookie in his hand in his mouth. It really is too bland. It basically has no flavor, and I don't think any butter was used. Wensu put the cookie down, took off his glasses and put them aside, or find time to have a good chat with his schoolmate. At this time on the other side, Luo Lianqing came back after throwing the trash and took out her phone. She searched seriously, how to determine a person's sexual orientation. If a guy doesn't react to a girl with a good figure and looks pretty, does that mean he likes guys? No, I feel like he would still be shy, right? Luo Liaoqing frowned as she looked at the second search result and muttered, it's not like he didn't react. I think he's still. Miao Yoke walked over and gave her a gentle nudge, tilting his head and meowing again. Luo Liaoqing came back to her senses and reached out to grab Yoke. I just had nothing to do, I was just a little curious. I don't know who to explain it to. She stroked the soft fur of Yoke and glanced at the extinguished phone again. She sighed and said, Yoke, I feel that he really resembles a friend of mine from the past, but that friend of mine was a girl, right? Could he be her sister? Naturally, Yoke was unable to answer her question. Luo Liaoqing sighed. If it really was someone she knew, she might be able to ask around. She glanced out the window. The weather was nice outside, but her gaze was a little unfocused. It seemed to be someone from the past, but the gender didn't match. The cat in her arms meowed once and ran away. Luo Liaoqing did not move, just as she did most of the time, sitting still and looking out the window. Her expression did not show any fluctuations in emotion. Suddenly there was a sound from across the street, and she finally moved and glanced in the direction of the door, a flash of something passing across her face. Maybe she could find some time to chat with Wensu. She hadn't really had a chance to do so before Taishi died. Chapter 15. Are you eating dinner with me tonight? Wensu just listened to Zhao Li venting for a while, from his boss to his department colleagues, to those slippery fish that he had followed for more than half a month without making a move. In the end, he concluded, no wonder you insisted on going to school, it's still better to go to school. He whispered, I was young and ignorant at the time, and I thought that special departments and stuff were really cool. Boy, I came directly in my sophomore year, and after all these years of work, I'm really impressed. He looked miserable. Wensu, however, only gave him a glance. But you said before that you were very happy and had found the meaning of life. That was in front of the leader, I can't just say it's okay like you did. Zhao Li sighed, you are a genius, irreplaceable, I'm not. Wensu stopped eating with his chopsticks and finally looked at him seriously. You are also irreplaceable, otherwise you wouldn't be so tired. Because you are irreplaceable, no one can take your place, and in the end, you are the ones who get tired. Zhao Li said without exaggeration that he felt like he had been punched in the gut by Wensu's words. He felt that his mother had said something so reasonable. My depressed and unhappy mood seems to have eased a little. He gave Wensu a funny look. No wonder Uncle Ugly likes you. Has he called you recently? No. Why would he call me? I don't want to get a call from him. Wensu gave a disgusted sound. Zhao Li's face showed a smiling expression. I see, I think he will call you, because he talks about you in the office every day. No, I told him not to disturb me during class. Wensu said coldly and ruthlessly, a boss needs to have a sense of boundaries. Zhao Li's mood, which had been depressed by his boss, instantly improved. This is what they call a match made in heaven. So Zhao Li left in a happy mood, which was a far cry from his dispirited appearance when he arrived. Wensu waited until he had gone before he started packing up. After finishing, he opened WeChat and sent a message with a picture of a clown. I just gave your subordinate some psychological counseling. Remember to settle the bill. 3 days holiday. The reply came quickly, Shaoan. I have a program here. Wensu didn't even finish reading it before he clicked on it. It seemed that there had been no major incidents recently, so he didn't care. Then he stopped looking at the clown's profile picture that kept sending him messages, and instead clicked on Luo Liaoqing's circle of friends. She still hadn't blocked him, and the latest 2 photos were the ones from today, while the ones further down were basically just cats. When planned for a while, and stopped on a circle of friends post from half a month ago. The text said, Yoke really likes the little cookies I baked for him. Below it was a short video, which Wensu clicked on. Sure enough, he saw Yoke eating the cookie, and the cookie looked familiar. He couldn't help but chuckle. He really wasn't imagining things. Wensu habitually wanted to push up his glasses, but he forgot that he wasn't wearing them. He reached up and pressed the bridge of his nose to forward the video directly to Luo Lianqing. Senior, do you like this shape for baking cookies? It feels quite cute. What did Zhao Li say? If you have feelings, or if you can be more proactive? He looked over there and saw that it was still typing, so he put down his phone and went to the kitchen to wash the dishes. You need to be patient when teasing a cat. When Wensu came out of the kitchen after washing the dishes, it was still typing. He could even imagine how she was struggling. Just as Wensu was about to open the keyboard and give her an excuse, a message came from across the room. Listen to my excuses, not explanations. Can you see it? Wensu laughed out loud, and he even cracked a joke. He was probably not very worried. Luo Yiqing was actually dying of worry. What was wrong with this Wensu? It was really a straight shot. She thought of countless excuses, but it felt like it was too rude. Still didn't send it. But if Wensu minded, it was indeed quite rude to offer someone else's cookies to Danawon. She looked at what Wensu had sent and sighed. She simply gave up and clicked on the voice message. She had become numb after so many times of being rejected. Sorry, that was really for the egg yolk, but the ingredients are all safe and fresh. I usually eat it too, except that I haven't added some of the seasonings and ingredients yet. The second thing is, do you really mind? I didn't mean anything by it. I'm really sorry. I was just being really stupid. The third thing is, I took a deep breath and accidentally clicked it. I really did accidentally click it. Anyway, I'm sorry. Wensu's face was slightly smiling after listening to the 3 voice messages. She could tell that she was really annoyed, and her tone had dropped. It sounded quite cute. Wensu typed back a message. I don't really mind, no wonder the egg yolk just kept tapping the box. I'm really sorry, I seem to have been very rude. How about I apologize to you by taking you out to dinner? Wensu didn't expect to get a bonus. He looked at the message about apologizing and deleted the half-written words in the chat box, replying, sure, when? Tonight? There's a restaurant across the street that seems pretty good. Great. The two of them booked their dinner for tonight through 2 doors apart. Luo Lianqing let out a breath and finally moved to get up from the carpet. After entering the bedroom, she muttered, what should I wear tonight? If Wenze were here, he would notice that there is a photo frame on her bedside table, and inside the frame are 2 little girls, exactly the same as his. Luo Lianqing looked for some clothes, and finally stopped. What am I doing? It's still a long way from dinner time. She lightly curled the corner of her mouth, and somehow she was still a little happy. She couldn't find a reason either. In the end, she decided to bake some cookies, the kind that people eat, of course. She exchanged it with Wensu's snack that had returned the egg yolk. Wensu didn't spend too much time on this. After setting a time, he turned on the computer. Although Zhao Li didn't say it clearly at noon, Wensu still knew that the problem with the professor this time might be somewhat serious. Something that could make the special management department intervene was not a trivial matter. He clicked on a page, entered a string of codes, and the computer quickly displayed a large map, with a red dot in the experimental building of Wensu's current school. After all this time, that thing has not even been moved. Wensu frowned slightly. These things have been out of here for so long, did the people who took over not want them? He tapped his finger lightly on the table and entered another code. A trajectory appeared on the page. It really hadn't moved at all. After leaving the sex shop, it had been moved directly to the lab, and there was no other trajectory at all. Chapter 16 Luo Yiqing is special. Wensu thought about the case that Zhao Li just mentioned and transferred to the Special Investigation Department, so it has nothing to do with them. He made a sound of disgust. He only hesitated for a second before closing the computer. He was not a motivated person. Moreover, he took their advice. Since Uncle Ugly had given up the case, it meant that they were not suitable to follow it anymore. It was useless to dwell on it. Wensu turned off his computer and turned on his phone, opening one group chat after another. Every day, there were 99 plus new messages, and he didn't know what to chat about. But when he got to the group chat for his class, he noticed someone had a DM, so he pulled up the chat and took a look. He noticed it was Wang Meng, and the question was about basketball. He hadn't signed up for basketball before, but now he suddenly wanted to play for some reason. But the spots were full, so he asked in the group chat who Lin Fan had. Lin Fan didn't think much of it, and just sent the list. As a result, he immediately said, Wensu can't play basketball. I haven't seen him play in all these years. Lin Fan replied a few words saying that he had seen Wensu play and he was quite good. Wang Meng then said directly, "No way, neither my roommate nor I have played." When Su at W, "Why don't you give me your spot? My girlfriend is coming to watch." When Su wasn't looking at his phone at the time, so he didn't reply. Someone in the group said that Wang Meng had said that if everyone was available, they could do it next time. Wang Meng didn't know why, but he insisted on playing this time, and kept it mentioning when Su at W, "Come out and say something, give it to me, you don't usually play basketball anyway, and you don't like group activities." A few mentions followed. When Su didn't really have a strong attachment to playing basketball, but he really didn't like Wang Meng's attitude. So he replied, "I want to play." Wang Meng replied quickly, "Ha ha ha, you want to play? If you lose, you're responsible? I'm on the basketball team. You can be a substitute. This is a bit wrong." Lin Fan came out and said, "You can't blame one person for losing, and if your basketball team doesn't know, they'll think you're on the national basketball team. I even asked you before if you wanted to sign up, and you said no because you were tired." A few girls also came out and said that Wang Meng was inexplicable, and friendship is the most important thing in this kind of competition. After all, compared to Wang Meng, Wen Su is much better looking, and who doesn't like to watch handsome guys play basketball? Wang Meng probably didn't expect so many people to suddenly come to help Wen Su, so he simply sent a voice message in the group chat. Although he said that friendship comes first, I'm also doing this for the collective honor, right? And I heard that the top 3 tutors will get a bonus. I'm doing this for everyone's sake. It's as if he said that if he works hard, he will definitely win, and if Wen Su works hard, he will definitely lose. Wen Su made a sound of disgust, and just as he was about to type again, he saw a familiar cat head emoji appear. I don't really care about the prize money, as long as you all have fun. Besides, Wen Su might not necessarily lose, and even if you're there, he might not necessarily win. Don't say things like that, Wang Meng. The emoji was followed by a cat head emoji, which didn't seem to cause much embarrassment. Qin Yanran also posted a comment at this time. I've seen Wen Su play basketball before, and he's pretty good. You can be the substitute, Wang Meng. Someone else followed up with a few comments, saying that the teacher didn't mind the prize money, and it didn't matter who played. But a few of the guys still felt like they really wanted to win. The class group became a lot more lively for a while. Wen Su stopped typing halfway through and raised an eyebrow at the comment Luo Lianqing had posted. It looked like he would have to thank her for speaking up for him at dinner tonight. The two of them felt rather awkward. Although they had arranged to go out for dinner together and lived across the street from each other, they had not arranged to go out together. Wen Su did not get up from the sofa until he heard the sound of the door closing across the street. He went to the bathroom to wash his face before going out. When he arrived in front of the Cantonese restaurant Luo Lianqing had mentioned, he found that there were already quite a few people inside. It was not far from the university, so there should be quite a few students there as well. Wen Su looked around as soon as he entered and saw Luo Yiqing sitting by the window. She was wearing a short skirt today, a black skirt under a white jacket, a combination that was never wrong. Even from the side, you could see that she had long legs, and her hair was tied up in a ponytail behind her back. At that moment, she was looking sideways at the boy next to her. 2 boys standing next to her were telling her something. She had a smile on her face, but shook her head to reject them when they took out their phones. The boys obviously still didn't want to give up and said something else. But Luo Lianqing was also very firm in her attitude and still shook her head. Wen Su had long heard Lin Fan say that she was popular, but he didn't expect her to be so popular. After hesitating for a moment, he walked over. As soon as he got close, he heard Luo Lianqing say, "Sorry, my WeChat is full. Can you give me your phone number?" The boy said shamelessly that he had rarely met his favorite goddess outside, and his roommates were watching not far away. He had just had a couple of sips of beer, so he came over. His roommate next to him also said, "Senior, this kid is your brain-dead fan, dragging us to vote on the school forum every day." Luo Liaoqing's smile did not change, and she said to them, "Thank you very much, but I'm really sorry." At this time, she saw Wen Su walking over, and said to the 2 boys, "The person I've been waiting for is here." "I'm sorry." After being rejected 3 times in a row, the boy also knew that he had no chance. Hearing that the person she was waiting for was here, he turned his head and looked over. He saw a somewhat familiar-looking boy walking over. They turned back to their conversation and said, "Excuse us." Wen Su looked at the 2 boys, who looked at him before turning away. He looked down at Luo Ruiqing and said, "Senior is quite popular." "I think so too, but the younger students are not far behind. Sit down." Luo Lianqing glanced at him. He was still wearing his usual white t-shirt inside and a black jacket outside, jeans and sneakers. TSK, as if she took her time picking out her clothes and putting on a light makeup to pay more attention. She picked up a small box at hand, the same one she gave Wensu before, and apologized seriously. "These are the cookies I baked this afternoon. I'm really sorry about what happened before." Wensu reached out and took them, not expecting her to have baked new cookies. He glanced at Luo Lianqing. He found that she was quite different from most girls he had met. She was pretty, always greeted him with a smile, and seemed to have no sense of distance. But whether it was from Lin Fan's words or what he had seen, she was very decisive in rejecting people, leaving no room for speculation. It seemed that there was no distance, but in fact she had a good grasp of the situation. It was like this time with the cookies. He had already shown that he didn't really care, but when they met, she still apologized very seriously and baked the cookies again. Wenze really felt that she was very special. Although he hadn't had much contact with women, Luo Yanqing was different from them all. She was beautiful, but it seemed that she never regarded her beauty as a privilege. Xin Yanran had said that she liked him, but sometimes she would still accept help from boys. She would also use her popular appearance to gain some privileges, even if it was just something harmless. Or it was behavior that she herself hadn't noticed. In fact, it wasn't just her, but many girls would do the same. But Luo Liaoqing seemed to never do it. So in Wensu's opinion, she was special. Chapter 17, There is always some impulse in the middle of the night. Wensu took his eyes off her and looked at the cookies, which still smelled fragrant. "Thank you." "No, what I did before was rude." Luo Lianqing sighed. "As long as you don't get angry, that's fine. I didn't really mean anything. I'm really embarrassed." She looked at Wensu with a somewhat plaintive expression, as if she had been dying to meet you, or was on the way to dying. Wensu thought back, and it seemed that this was indeed the case. Not only her, but it seemed that he was also quite dead. He couldn't help but laugh, a little helpless. "It seems that this is the case. I don't mind the cookies, and I even ate a few of them. They were quite delicious." Luo Wuqing let out a sigh of relief when she heard this. She handed Wensu her phone with the QR code for ordering, and said, "It's fine if you don't mind. You can order whatever you want." Wensu glanced at her phone, but then took it and looked at it before returning it to her. "I'll do it, to apologize for bumping into you at the scene of the social death every time before." While saying this, he scanned the code and ordered a few dishes that Luo Yuqing had just ordered, and then added 2 dishes of his own, and placed the order directly, neat and tidy. Luo Yuqing took the phone and was silent for a moment. "I'm quite happy if you don't mention the social death." Wensu looked at her and asked, "Do you really mind that much?" "If it were a stranger, it would actually be fine." Luo Luqing sighed, "But neighbors, students, what kind of death proposition is this?" She propped her chin up and looked at Wensu across the street and said seriously, "It's a good thing you're more of a quiet person." "Well, be quiet, otherwise I feel like the whole school knows about this." Wensu couldn't help but laugh when he saw her struggle to say the word quiet. "Are you trying to say that I'm not sociable?" Luo Yiqing didn't expect him to use this adjective to describe himself. She paused for a moment, thinking, "That's not true. I think it's quite normal. Everyone has a different personality. If you really didn't get along with others, you wouldn't have participated in the basketball game. The really unfriendly kids I met before didn't even have friends." She gave a small smile as if she had thought of something. "But you are quite similar to my friend. When you are embarrassed, your ears turn red first." Wensu didn't expect her to notice this, and he gently averted his gaze. "I'm rarely embarrassed. Unless I'm really as socially awkward as before." Luo Yuqing didn't dwell on this issue. "Anyway, thank you for not blabbing everywhere, otherwise I would really be embarrassed." Wensu hesitated when he mentioned this. "It was a bit presumptuous, but you said this morning that I was the first member of the opposite sex to enter your apartment, so hasn't your boyfriend been there?" After he finished speaking, he added, "It's okay if you can't answer. I know this question is a bit presumptuous. I shouldn't even have asked it." Wensu sighed inwardly, blaming Zhao Li for saying such nonsense. It was quite embarrassing to ask such a question. But Luo Lianqing just froze for a moment, then understood. "I don't have a boyfriend, and those things I bought are actually useful." She let out a breath, her voice lowered a little. "My father started out making sex toys, mainly doing import and export. The business is, well, quite big." Her gaze was a little dazed. "My mother hopes that I can, inherit it. I studied art design before, and then management in graduate school. Aren't forums pretty curious? My mother hopes that I will study it. Luo Yanqing said this with no particular emotion, so I hadn't researched those things before and wanted to buy the actual products to look at them. She said it very frankly. I bought a whole bunch online. The night you first met me, I wanted to see if there was anything different in the physical store. Speaking of which, she suddenly remembered that when they first met, Wensu also appeared in the sex shop in the early morning? At that time, he was also wearing pajamas. Luo Lianqing's face looked a little strange as she glanced at Wensu. From the last time she saw him being told off, it seemed that he should not have a girlfriend. So is this a date? Wensu was still thinking that studying art design and designing sex toys should have nothing in common, when he suddenly met Luo Yueqing's somewhat strange gaze. What's wrong? He asked, honestly adding, but this is the reason you went shopping in the middle of the night, which I didn't expect. Luo Yueqing coughed lightly. This place is too close to the school, and I'm afraid of being seen in the daytime. Although there's nothing to fear from a false accusation, as the saying goes, 3 people can make a tiger, I'm still quite afraid of trouble. Wensu nodded, and the two of them did not dwell on this issue anymore. It was just that when they ate dinner later, Wensu always felt that Luo Yueqing's occasional, fleeting gaze would fall on him. It was hard for him not to notice. When he looked up at her, she quickly averted her gaze again. This relationship between the two of them was also quite awkward. To say that they were familiar would not be an understatement. But it's been almost 2 months since the start of the semester, so they can't say they're not familiar. Wensu was a man of few words, and fortunately, Luo Liaoqing has a high emotional quotient, so there are basically no awkward moments. It's just that the occasional prying gaze makes it really hard for Wensu to ignore. So he simply put down his chopsticks, sighed, and said, "Do you have any questions you want to ask, senior?" Luo Liaoqing was quiet for a moment, and said carefully, "Actually, I feel that this question is not very polite, and it seems bad for me to ask." Wensu sighed, "But it's hard for me when you look at me like that, and with our current relationship, there's nothing rude about it, right? After all, I've already had all of your egg yolk snacks." He said the latter sentence with a smile. Luo Lianqing relaxed and carefully confirmed once more, "So I can ask?" Wensu nodded, and saw the light of curiosity flash in her big, watery eyes. For a moment, she looked just like Yolk, with the same big, beautiful eyes. "You know why I was there that night, so why did you come in at that time?" It was quite sudden. Luo Yueqing stared at him with curiosity in her eyes. Wensu. I can't tell her that. I can't tell her I was there to catch a spy, can I? Wensu was silent for a while, his mind racing. Luo Yancheng saw that he had no expression on his face and didn't say anything, so she thought it was inconvenient to say, so she hurriedly said, "This is your private matter, it's okay if you don't say anything, I can understand." After she finished, she nodded self-affirmingly. Wensu always felt that if he didn't say something, she would definitely misunderstand something. So he suddenly spoke in a low voice, "Senior, I'm a young teenager, and I'm always a little impulsive late at night, you know?" Luo Yancheng's face showed a dazed expression. Impulsive? Chapter 18. Girls are such terrifying creatures, aren't they? The beginning of everything is difficult, but once you get past the beginning, it's not so hard. Wensu nodded. "Yes, that's why I went out and bought a male-friendly interactive toy." Luo Lianqing took a moment to respond, and then she coughed softly in embarrassment. Whispering, "I see. It's actually quite embarrassing to discuss this with someone of the opposite sex you don't know very well, and yet she was the one who brought up the topic in the first place." Moreover, Wensu didn't have any particular expression on his face when he said these things, which made Luo Liqing not too embarrassed. The topic was just swept aside. Luo Liqing was a little relieved in her heart, and fortunately, he wasn't asking her out or asking her out on a date. As for why she was relieved, she couldn't explain it herself. She just knew that after everyone had talked about this awkward topic, the awkward atmosphere between the two of them had disappeared. Luo Liqing was someone who would not make others feel awkward, and at least Wensu felt quite comfortable with her. She would take the initiative to find topics, and they could all be picked up, so that Wensu, who didn't have much to talk about, wouldn't be very awkward. They talked about the basketball game. Luo Liuqing glanced at Wensu and said, "How come I remember that Wang Mang was your roommate before? Do you have a conflict?" Wensu took a sip of water and glanced at her. "Why do you ask?" "It just felt like when he tagged you in group chat, his tone was a bit." Luo Liaoqing's face was a little conflicted, so it wasn't friendly, and before in the group chat he actually messaged me privately. After all, Luo Liuqing's side collected the basketball game forms in a unified manner. Wang Meng initially looked for her, mainly asking if he could still sign up for the basketball game, and Luo Liuqing said it was full, but substitutes were available. Wang Meng asked who was on the team, which was not a secret, so Luo Liuqing sent him a glance at the roster. After that, Wang Meng's words and actions implied that Wensu didn't exercise at all and didn't even know how to play basketball. Luo Liuqing didn't have the patience to watch, and just said that if you sign up, you can participate, and it's not a very important event. Wang Meng shut up, and as a result, there was the incident in the group. After Luo Liuqing finished speaking, she glanced at Wensu. Her tone was playful. Judging from the percentage of people in the class who spoke up for you, it's clear that you have good luck with the opposite sex. There are a few guys here who probably don't like you very much, right? Wensu looked at her in surprise. But why would I want guys to like me? That's terrifying, isn't it? Luo Liuqing didn't expect him to joke around, and for a moment she didn't know how to react. After she recovered, she couldn't hold back her laughter. She also thought about how she had previously misunderstood that he liked men. You seem to want to keep us from meeting, and I thought. She stopped there. Wensu thought to himself, Zhao Li is such a hothead, he might say something. Of course I didn't want them to meet. Smiling, he asked, what did you think? Luo Liuqing was silent. It wasn't easy to say. Wensu could tell from her expression that it wasn't good news, but it was better than the constant awkwardness. He pressed, just tell me, otherwise we'll both be in an awkward situation, and that's really quite embarrassing. Luo Liuqing looked at him again. There was some hesitation in her beautiful almond-shaped eyes, and in the end she whispered, I'm sorry. It might be a misunderstanding, but I'm not sure. I just thought you two were a couple. Wensu. The smile on Wensu's face froze. He looked at Luo Ruiqing, who was a little unsteady, and said, a pair. Me and Zhao Li? A guy? Luo Ruiqing knew from his reaction that she must have misunderstood. Her heart sank even further. She leaned back unconsciously and said, ha, 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 I knew it was a misunderstanding. Her voice gradually became smaller, and then she looked at the silent Wensu with trepidation. Wensu suddenly smiled. He reached out and pushed his glasses up his nose. His tone was very serious. Senior, you've got it all wrong. I like girls. Ha, I thought so too. Luo Yanqing reached out and touched her own face, feeling a little embarrassed. I just saw you reject Qin Yanran earlier. She's quite pretty, haha. There are quite a lot of good-looking people. I can't like them all, can I? Wensu felt a little helpless. He then looked at her as if it were unintentional, and I didn't lie to her. I like long-legged people. You didn't lie? Luo Liuqing's expression revealed surprise, and without thinking, she blurted out, so you like me? Wensu was silent again. He stared at Luo Liuqing's pretty face, not knowing how to answer for a moment. It wouldn't be appropriate to say that he didn't like her, but it wouldn't be appropriate to say that he did. Luo Liuqing frowned slightly. I thought that I would only dare to go out to dinner with you if you didn't like me. There was some annoyance in her tone. This made Wensu very curious, and he couldn't help but ask why she didn't like it before daring to go out to dinner. Luo Liuqing looked at him, wanting to say something but unable to find the words. She had already said so much, because if you like me, I'm afraid there will be misunderstandings if I go out to dinner with someone alone. In fact, Luo Liuqing felt that Wensu didn't seem to like her, because she had many suitors and had encountered endless ways of being pursued. There was nothing like Wensu. If she didn't take the initiative to find him, he really had no sense of existence. Luo Liuqing couldn't help but confirm, you really like me, don't you? Just because I like long legs doesn't mean I like all long legs. Wensu sighed. The phrase I like you was Qin Yanran's own speculation. I just didn't deny it. I explained to you before that there was a misunderstanding. As soon as he finished speaking, he saw the girl across from him reach up and pat her chest in relief, relieved that it was just a misunderstanding. Wensu couldn't deny that he felt a little upset. Is it so terrible to be liked by him? Luo Liuqing looked at him and said, luckily you don't like me, so maybe we can be friends. She said it very seriously. You have seen me die too many times, and I feel that we need to be friends. After all, it is not so hard for me to accept being seen dying by a friend. Wensu discovered that her way of thinking seemed to be different from others. Being seen dying by a friend is not also dying? If we are friends, then you will definitely help me keep the secret, right? As she said this, she blinked her big eyes and looked at him with an expectant face. No one can resist this face, right? Who can resist when a young lady is being cute? Won-soo didn't feel like he could anyway. His Adam's apple bobbed up and down a little, and he felt a little dry in his throat. Won-soo was the first to look away from her, and of course, I will keep your secret. Even if they weren't friends, he wasn't the kind of person who would blabber. Luo Yiqing let out a sigh of relief, and then suddenly asked, since we are friends, can I ask a question? Well, you ask. Why don't you like me? Am I not pretty? Are my legs not long enough? Am I not attractive? Or do you like the type of big-breasted lowly? Won-soo looked at Luo Yiqing, who was staring at him with curiosity, and once again fell silent. Why do girls' minds jump around so quickly? Chapter 19, What's your size? Of course, in the end, Luo Yiqing never got an answer from him. Won-soo just looked at her in silence. For some reason, Luo Yiqing read the confusion in his eyes and just smiled and changed the subject. A meal had brought the two closer together, and it also gave Won-soo a little more insight into her. He discovered that on the surface she was a mature and composed senior, but in fact, to some extent, she was a little simple. For example, at this time, after dinner, the two of them walked home together, and they were supposed to go their separate ways. But before entering the door, Luo Yiqing looked at him with a face full of confusion, and finally asked, since we are friends, can you do me a favor? Won-soo raised his eyebrows at her, and in the end did not refuse. Although he had not made many friends of the opposite sex, Luo Yiqing's request for help was a kind of trust. But he had not expected this kind of help. At the moment, he was sitting in her living room, holding the egg yolk in his arms. Luo Yiqing was sitting opposite him, with a laptop on her lap. This scene strangely reminded Won-soo of an interrogation room. Although the interrogation room was not this relaxed. Luo Yiqing tapped a few times on the laptop and then said, do you mind if I ask you some more personal questions? I actually finished this questionnaire a long time ago, but because it's quite personal, I don't think most people would want to answer it, so I've been putting it aside. Won-soo's hand stroking the cat stopped, and he had a bad feeling. I feel that if the scale is relatively large. Aren't we friends? Luo Yiqing interrupted him, and her eyes fell on him with expectation. So is the word friend a catch-all? At the same time, he was a little curious about how large the scale was. So he sighed and said, you go ahead. Luo Yiqing gave a satisfied smile and said, shall I start? Won-soo, you're 21, right? This is a questionnaire about men's private parts. Oh, don't worry, I'll keep it confidential. She smiled innocently at Won-soo and asked, what's your size? Won-soo's bad feeling came true. He looked at Luo Yiqing expressionlessly and said, I think you mean clothes or pants? No, it's... Luo Yiqing's gaze settled on a certain place on him and stopped, her face slightly red. I already said it's private. She added, when you're excited. Won-soo, never mind, it doesn't feel like they're very suitable as friends. He pushed his glasses up and gave a smile. I just remembered, I think I left the gas on at home. But don't all apartments here use natural gas? Luo Yiqing looked disappointed. Are you not willing to do it? Never mind, I'll find an opportunity next time. Wait a minute, you're not thinking of going to someone else to ask this question, are you? Won-soo interrupted her, not sure if she was really simple or just stupid. His gaze was a little confused, and his eyebrows furrowed. Luo Yiqing froze for a moment when he interrupted her. Then this questionnaire should be done, because my father's company needs to, well, understand some of this stuff. What Luo Yiqing didn't say was that of course she didn't need to do it, there were company employees for these things, and it wasn't her turn. As for the fact that she was sitting here right now, asking Won-soo this question, of course it was because she was doing it on purpose. But her face didn't show it, she just looked at Won-soo with a serious expression. Won-soo was a little speechless, who would be nice to someone's daughter and ask them to do these surveys? But looking at Luo Yiqing, who looked so innocent, a lump formed in his throat and it was hard to breathe. After taking a deep breath, he said, the first question is over, it hasn't been measured. Luo Yiqing let out a sound, as if she was a little disappointed, so let's have a chance to measure it in the future. Under Won-soo's speechless gaze, she jumped to the second question, seeing the opposite sex's genitals will cause an X impulse? Won-soo. Legs. Ha? Just the legs? And the waist, and the breasts. Won-soo let out a breath, telling himself that this was just an ordinary questionnaire. He was just cooperating with his newly made friend. Wence's somewhat suspicious gaze fell on Luo Yueqing. Was she doing it on purpose or by accident? But looking at her serious typing face, he was a little unsure. In Wence's opinion, Luo Yueqing's actions were more like deliberate provocation. Then he thought, maybe he was too naive, and this was just a questionnaire? She treated him as a friend? The third question, do you have any special emotions when you see special types of clothing? For example, lingerie. Yes. What are your preferences? Air hostess uniforms, I guess. Do you have a preference for black silk, white silk, or any other type? It's fine. After a while, Luo Lianqing asked very seriously, and there was no unusual emotion. Wenceau, from his initial doubts, slowly came to regard this as an ordinary questionnaire. There weren't many questions, just 20. Luo Lianqing finally let out a sigh of relief after typing in the last word. She looked up at Wenceau and saw him staring at her expressionlessly while gently petting the cat in his hands. The yellow cat lying on his lap had already started purring contentedly. Luo Yueqing's gaze swept over the yellow cat, a little sour. It's still better to be a cat, not having to think about anything. Finally, she looked at Wenceau and asked the last question. Can I ask one last question? Wenceau had gone numb, from initial doubt to certainty. The senior in front of him, who matched his aesthetic tastes, had treated him like a questionnaire subject, from the beginning to the end, with questions about the frequency and duration of sex. Wenceau was a bit of an introvert and socially awkward person, but at this moment, he had forgotten what those things meant. Go ahead and ask. He looked at Luo Lianqing and sighed, taking the lead and asking a question. Are you, to all of your friends of the opposite sex, always this direct? Especially since we've only just become friends? Huh? Luo Lianqing froze for a moment, as if she had been caught off guard. She frowned at Wenceau in front of her and said very seriously, I don't know how to answer this because I don't have any friends of the opposite sex. You're the first one. Is this a bit too fast? Wenceau was stunned by this answer. You don't have any friends of the opposite sex? Luo Yueqing lowered her eyes and didn't look at Wenceau again. At this time, she looked at the cat on his lap and said, Do you know why I bought egg yolks in the first place? Because I am like an egg yolk. She gave Wenceau a bright smile. I used to be disgusted by the approach of the opposite sex as well. Of course, it's better now, but I really don't have any friends of the opposite sex. You are the first. Wenceau looked at her bright smile. Although she was smiling, her face was a little pale. Why? Chapter 20, I always feel like I'm being flirted with again. Wenceau's voice was a little low. Why don't you have any friends of the opposite sex? Because when I was little, my mother said I was pretty, and any members of the opposite sex who approached me must have ulterior motives. Luo Liqing's voice was very faint. When I was young, I didn't believe her words, so she used her own methods to teach me a lesson, so for a long time I couldn't get close to the opposite sex. She didn't look at Wenceau again, but stood up and reached over to take the water he had barely touched. I'll get you a new glass of water. She walked over to the side and poured the water in the glass away, replacing it with a glass of warm water. Later, when I grew up, I realized that my mother's education was actually wrong, but at that time, I had basically already conditioned myself to it. It took a long time for me to heal, and I'm much better now, but I also missed the best time to make friends, so I don't have any friends of the opposite sex. Luo Liqing took the glass and put it in front of Wenceau. She could only say that most of the opposite sex I encounter now probably still have other intentions for me. She gave a smile and looked back at Wenceau's eyes, but your feelings are different. But there's another main reason, you look a lot like a childhood playmate of mine, which naturally makes me feel good about you. Of course she's a girl, so I was just asking if you have any sisters? An older or younger sister? Luo Liqing finished and looked at him expectantly. Unfortunately, Wenceau shook his head and said, No, I'm an only child. I do have a cousin, but she's more than 10 years older than me, so I don't think she was your playmate either. Upon hearing this, Luo Yueqing's face showed disappointment. Her emotions didn't fluctuate much, and she spoke lightly about the past, but for some reason, Wenceau felt a pang of pain. He didn't know what kind of mother would tell her child that if the opposite sex approaches you, don't even mention things like pictures. He didn't even dare to speculate about the way her mother had taught her a lesson. Perhaps he was being paranoid, but Wenceau still couldn't help but think in a bad direction. He guessed that his gaze was too obvious, so Luo Lianqing felt it. She tilted her head and looked at Wenceau, feeling pity for me? Not really, it's quite normal not to have a friend of the opposite sex, isn't it? She hesitated a bit at the end of her sentence. But when Sun nodded, "It's quite normal, I don't have one either." He glanced at Luo Lianqing and added, "But now I have you." Upon hearing this, Luo Lianqing seemed to be a little happy, and her emotions were obvious. When Su discovered that ever since she said they were friends, it seemed that she had drawn him into the harmless category. Although he currently did not know how this category was distinguished, and what qualities he had that made her consider him her only friend of the opposite sex. In this regard, his emotional intelligence has never been very high, but he can sense that Luo Liaoqing seems more genuine now. "I don't actually know if this friend dynamic between us is the right one. Meow Meow and I are the kind of friends who can tell each other anything from the moment we meet. I feel that you are quite similar to her." "Ah, Meow Meow is that girl from last time you met her. It's just that you both give me the impression that you are both harmless." Luo Liaoqing blinked, "And fortunately you don't have a girlfriend right now, otherwise it might be difficult for me to be friends with you. The boundaries are quite clear." Wen Su couldn't help but be curious. "How do you distinguish between harmless?" This, Luo Lianqing smiled, "The fact that you didn't say anything the last few times means that you're not the type of person who likes to gossip. Also, I'm quite pretty, and even if I'm not their type, it seems that most people get a little carried away when they see a beautiful woman approaching. Of course, I'm not saying that about everyone, but you didn't." Luo Yiqing looked at Wen Su and said very seriously, "And there is the questionnaire I just gave you. If someone really had bad intentions, after the few encounters we had and after I asked you to come in and take the questionnaire, they would probably think I'm not a decent person, but you didn't. Apart from the initial awkwardness, you didn't show any other emotions, and I think you're suitable to be friends with." "Wen Su, don't you think this test of yours is a bit risky?" Wen Su sighed, entered the room, and then if someone really had other intentions, you wouldn't even have a chance to resist. Luo Yiqing blinked, and suddenly took out a small alarm from the sofa where she was sitting. "This has just been in my hand the whole time." Wen Su looked at the alarm for a moment in silence, and when he pressed it, the automatic positioning alarm sounded a siren. It was indeed quite safe. "And I really have learned Sanda, and I can fight 3 men at once without any problem. The most important thing is that you are really the only member of the opposite sex I've brought home. I felt before that you weren't a bad person, so don't underestimate a girl's sixth sense." Luo Yiqing explained very seriously, but Wen Su still felt that she was too naive. If she met someone with a deep mind, she would simply be inviting trouble. But in the end, he didn't dwell on this issue. Instead, he asked her seriously not to test people in this way again, as it was not safe. Luo Yiqing nodded, acting obediently. "I don't think I'll meet another person of the opposite sex who wants to be friends next time. The same goes for the same sex." Wen Su couldn't help but warn her, "It's not just the opposite sex that's dangerous. Society is still quite complicated nowadays." Luo Liaoqing suddenly laughed at the sight of him earnestly warning her. Wen Su was momentarily stunned, and realized that he had said a bit too much tonight. Luo Liaoqing's appearance of being calm, intelligent, and having a high emotional quotient was a bit silly once you tore it apart. It made him worry a little, wondering how she had never been cheated on before, and whether it was because she was lucky. After she finished laughing, Luo Liaoqing said thank you very seriously. "Thank you, I know you are worried about me, but I am older than you, and I am not really stupid." She looked at Wen Su's face and said, "I just have an inexplicable low level of guard around you, and you are the only one." Wen Su's heartbeat quickened a little, and he always felt like he was being flirted with again. "Oh, right. I'll give you a present." Luo Lianqing suddenly thought of something, stood up, ran into the bedroom, and took out a box. "It's quite big. Put it in front of Wen Su, we're friends now, this is a present for you." Wen Su looked at the box on the floor and really wanted to ask what it was. But he didn't ask until he left. Luo Lianqing stood in the doorway to say goodbye to him, and watched him walk into the house across the street before closing the door. "I made a friend of the opposite sex today, I'm very happy." Chapter 21, It's Not Good to Hold Back. When Su had returned to his house with a suitcase by almost 10 p.m. He always felt that today had been a bit magical, so he just became good friends with his counselor? He sighed, what was all this about? He walked into the living room and put down the suitcase, first taking out the cookies baked by Luo Yuqing and putting them on the table. Only then did he open the gift that Luo Yuqing had given him. But when Wenze looked at the box of love and relationship products, he suddenly fell silent again. He had already forgotten how many times he had been silent that night. Did the contents look like they had been opened? His forehead began to throb. So what did Luo Yueching mean? Just as he was thinking, his phone vibrated continuously. He took out his phone listlessly and glanced at it. It was the familiar cat avatar of Luo Yueching. I've already opened those things and looked at them, and I wore disposable gloves when I touched them, so they're very clean. You said before that you do this once a week or so, but isn't that actually a bit too little at your age? It's not good to keep it all inside. Didn't you go out in the middle of the night to buy this before? I've got a lot here, so if you need any in the future, you don't have to go out in the middle of the night. Oh, by the way, I've got a few more deliveries behind me, so if you want me to finish looking at them, I can take them to you. Behind that, she sent a cute little bear emoji. Won-soo completely lost control of his expression. The hand holding the phone trembled slightly. At this moment, Won-soo suddenly didn't know what to reply. Should he reply with thank you? At this moment, the phone vibrated again. No need to say thank you, we are friends. The sentence "we are friends" made Won-soo feel that he had already endured too much tonight. He glanced at the box of things and finally let out a heavy sigh. What a mature, sensible, and emotionally intelligent senior. It's all about the filters. How does he feel that Luo Lianqing is somewhat lacking in heart in some way? Won-soo shook his hand and replied, that's enough. Besides, these things aren't disposable. He looked at the sentence he had sent and deliberated. He typed again, although we are friends, it's still quite embarrassing to send this. But before he finished typing, the other person sent a message. It's fine, I can't use this stuff either. I didn't forget to send you the skip list, I took it out. But next time you do it yourself, could you let me know the size? I'll fill in the form. Oh, asterisk forward slash 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 asterisk, Q. Won-soo looked at the emoticon. Bit by bit, he deleted the words he had typed, and decided not to argue with the idiot. He sent a message back saying, take a look, and don't do that questionnaire with anyone else. The other person sent an emoticon that said okay. Won-soo let out a sigh of relief and slumped onto the sofa. His mind was a little hazy, his eyes beginning to drift, he was so tired. He felt more tired than if he had worked overtime for a few days. But there seemed to be some inexplicable strange feeling in his heart. His eyes suddenly flashed back to the look on Luo Lianqing's face when she said the reason she was afraid to make friends with the opposite sex. Won-soo clearly saw loneliness and a hint of sadness in her eyes. Although it quickly faded, Won-soo noticed it. He sighed softly. It was true that everyone had secrets. It was already surprising enough that Luo Lianqing could tell him this today. Won-soo glanced at the suitcase and then picked it up and carried it into the bedroom. He decided to forget about everything that had happened today. The two of them didn't see much of each other in the following days. Won-soo was already in his third year at university and didn't have many classes. Many of his classmates had already gone out to do internships, but Won-soo really didn't want to be exploited again, so he insisted on going back to school to take classes. So he has been stuck at home for a few days. These days, he basically stays at home as much as possible. Being a nerd is really happy. During this period, the only time he went out in the morning was to take out the trash, and he encountered Luo Yueching, who was hurrying to school. The two of them only had time to say hello before she hurried away. He also took care of her cat twice, and they really got along naturally. And the two of them do chat a lot on WeChat. After all, Won-soo has seen that Luo Yueching is essentially a person who is very eager to share. It's no exaggeration to say that if she encounters an ant carrying something on the street, she will take a picture of it and send it to Won-soo if she has time. Won-soo was a little uncomfortable at first, as he didn't really like WeChat chats. Well, it's not like that. He just didn't like chatting. But after Luo Lianqing sent him 3 messages that he didn't reply to, she sent him a message saying, why didn't you reply to my messages? Do you not want to be friends with me? Friends should share with each other. Won-soo. Then he sent a smiley face. Luo Lianqing seemed to be easily satisfied, and she started sharing with him happily again. Tomorrow is the basketball game, and that afternoon Lin Fan began reminding Won-soo to remember to come tomorrow, and also mentioned Wang Mang, who actually agreed to be a substitute. Won-soo didn't comment, but he was also a little surprised. Wang Mang is a person with a particularly strong sense of self-esteem, and I really didn't expect him to be willing to be a substitute. His previous comments in the group chat had seemed to indicate that he looked down on substitutes. Lin Fan was used to his silence and didn't wait for an answer. By the way, I heard a rumor that Wang Meng broke up with his girlfriend. Wensu was speechless. What did it matter if they broke up? Why should I be careful? Because I don't know if it's true, that they all say his girlfriend dumped Wang Meng because of you. Lin Fan gave a disgusted sound. 1. You're a disaster. Wensu, when you're sitting at home, trouble comes from nowhere. I don't even know his girlfriend's name, what does it have to do with me? Wensu's rare tone carried an emotion of helplessness. Lin Fan sighed, that's what hurts. In fact, I don't know if it's true or not. Wang Meng hasn't returned to the dormitory these few days. Anyway, I just wanted to remind you. Wensu sighed and thanked Lin Fan anyway. After hanging up the phone, Wensu didn't really care about it. He was a college student, not a child. Anyone with eyes could tell at a glance that it had nothing to do with him, right? Wensu felt that although Wang Meng was impulsive, he was not blind. At this time, Wensu never thought that sometimes people would only believe what they wanted to believe. Although Wensu and Luo Lianqing had never said it, they always maintained a distance between teacher and student at school. After all, Luo Lianqing was now Wensu's tutor, and if the two of them appeared to be too familiar, it was inevitable that people would think too much. Moreover, the two of them did not have many opportunities to meet at school, and the tutor did not need to come every day. At this time, Wensu was afraid that if he appeared too familiar with Luo Yueqing, it would cause discussion, but some people were not afraid. Lin Fan bumped Wensu and raised his chin, looking at Zhou Qi, who was being attentive. Wensu looked in the direction of his chin. Zhou Qi, wearing a number 9 jersey, was standing in front of Luo Yueqing, saying something, with a bright smile on his face. Luo Lianqing, on the other hand, had no expression on her face. She had worn a tracksuit to watch the basketball game today, a rather ordinary style that didn't reveal anything, and her ponytail was tied high. However, because of her good body proportions and long legs, she made the ordinary tracksuit look good, and Wensu also noticed that quite a few boys were secretly looking at her. Chapter 22, Double Standards Are Really Cute. Luo Lianqing had a smile on her face at the moment, but her heart was a little annoyed. She had many suitors, but now that everyone had actually been clearly rejected, they would not pester her. After all, there are plenty of other fish in the sea, but there is also a type that is a stalker. Zhou Qi in front of her is the latter type. Luo Lianqing has said more than once that she has no intention of dating. Even if there is Zhou Qi, he will not be her type. In fact, the words have been made very clear, but for some reason, Zhou Qi still doesn't seem to give up. For example, now, senior, if we win the game, will you promise to go out with me? Zhou Qi looked at Luo Lianqing with a smile. Strictly speaking, Zhou Qi is quite handsome, tall and big, looks very sunny, and is on the school basketball team. He should be the type that many girls would like, and there are still girls over there peeking. But Luo Lianqing looked at his face as he suddenly bent over and leaned in, took a step back, and felt a little disgusted. She sighed on her face, but said to Zhou Qi, "It's better to call me teacher. You guys play well." Her expression was very serious. This was a group activity. Zhou Qi looked at her pretty face and laughed. He straightened up and said, "I'm only fighting for you today. The collective honor is just a side effect." Whatever anyone else thinks, Luo Lianqing felt a little greasy when he said that. But many people around her who were close to her drew a breath, and a few girls seemed to be a little excited. Luo Yueqing, when is he leaving? It's annoying. Just when she was oiled up to the point where her toes were touching the ground, her gaze suddenly met Wensu's not far away. Wensu was just watching, and although he was far away, he was not really nearsighted, so naturally he could see Luo Yueqing's expression. For example, now, when she met his gaze, it suddenly brightened, and he even saw a message of help in it. Wensu was a little curious about what Zhou Qi had done. He took 2 steps forward, when Lin Fan called out to him, "Hey, where's Wen going?" He suddenly remembered that there was something he wanted to ask teacher Luo. Wensu glanced at his hand, which was being held. Lin Fan was speechless for a moment. This one really has low emotional intelligence. You didn't see that Zhou Qi was paying you attention? If you go up there, you'll just interrupt him, right? Lin Fan's voice was very low, because Zhou Qi is not a good-tempered person. Wensu's expression was calm, and after looking at Lin Fan for a moment, as if puzzled, he said, "Isn't teacher Luo our counselor? Isn't it reasonable for me to go and ask questions?" With that, he pulled away Lin Fan's hand and walked over. Lin Fan let out a sigh and saw his back as he strode past. He frowned slightly, as if Wen seemed different today. Wensu didn't care about him, and he strode over. The closer he got, the more certain he became that Luo Liangqing's eyes had indeed been filled with a plea for help. As soon as he got close, he heard Zhou Qi laugh and say, "Senior, what type do you like?" Luo Liangqing looked at Wensu as he approached. Although he hadn't done anything yet, she felt relieved. Wensu seemed like a friend who could give her a sense of security. She looked at Zhou Qi and said, "I don't know. I don't like guys like you anyway." There were a lot of people at the basketball court, and Zhou Qi didn't notice Wensu's approach. "How do you know you don't like it if you don't try it?" "I'm still pretty good. Everyone who's used it says it's good." The latter sentence was said very softly and ambiguously. Luo Lianqing's face changed directly, and this was already considered sexual harassment. Her face turned cold. "What do you mean, everyone says it's good?" Wensu's voice, which had been flat, suddenly came to mind. Zhou Qi's ambiguous smile on his face suddenly stopped. He turned his head and looked at Wensu. "Wensu? Hello, I'm looking for Teacher Luo." Wensu nodded at him with no expression, and what he said probably meant, "Get lost if you're not busy, I'm busy." Zhou Qi looked at Wensu's refined face and his expression wasn't very good. He had heard before that someone had met Wensu going out to dinner alone with Luo Yueqing. You have to know that when Luo Yueqing first arrived in their class, he had already said that night in the boys' dormitory that he wanted to pursue her. Zhou Qi considered himself to be rich and good-looking. The boys in his class all clamored for him and no one else was competing with him. It was just Wensu, who didn't live in the dormitory, but Lin Fan should have told him about it. At this time, seeing Wensu's expressionless face, Zhou Qi glanced at him and didn't say anything in the end. He just said to Luo Yueqing, "Wait until I win the game, senior, and we'll go on a date then. You won't regret it." After saying that, he didn't wait for Luo Yueqing to say anything and just left. The people around them, who didn't know what was going on, thought that Luo Yueqing had already agreed to him. Wensu also saw that quite a few people had taken out their phones, presumably to tell their friends the gossip. So this is how college students chase girls these days? He frowned slightly, then looked at Luo Yueqing, who looked speechless, and asked, "Are you okay?" "Yes." Luo Yueqing looked at Wensu expressionlessly, her eyes filled with grievance. "I feel like I've just been sexually harassed." Although he didn't say it explicitly, I feel that's what he meant. Her eyes were pleading, and her tone was very soft. Wensu inexplicably softened his heart. He sighed and said, "It's okay, I'll take care of it for you later." Luo Liaoqing was never a particularly pretentious person. Although Zhou Qi had just disgusted her a little, she let out a breath and said, "Forget it, it's like being bitten by a dog, so gross. But you play basketball later and cheer me on." She raised a smile and looked at Wensu, her voice very low. "If I win, you have to buy me dinner." Wensu's eyes showed a hint of a smile. "They all say I can't play, and you still expect me to win? If you lose, I'll comfort you and buy you dinner." Luo Lianqing looked completely reasonable, and it's not like you're the only one playing basketball, so come on. Her double standard made Wensu feel very comfortable. He nodded, his face clearly showing a smile. "Okay, I'll wait for you to buy me dinner." Lin Fan shouted from afar, "Shaowen! Get ready! Go, come on." Luo Lianqing winked at him. Wensu nodded, suddenly wanting to reach out and touch her head, but in the end, he just moved his fingers and turned around to run over. Luo Lianqing also went and sat down in the audience seats next to her. As soon as she sat down, a few girls sat down next to her. Luo Lianqing glanced over and saw Qin Yanran and two other girls who weren't in her class, one of whom seemed to be Wang Meng's girlfriend. Luo Lianqing had met them once before. They called out, "Teacher Luo." Luo Lianqing smiled and nodded to them, "Hello." Qin Yanran looked at the smile on her face and felt a little uncomfortable. She really was someone who was hard to dislike. Qin Yanran thought about how Wensu had just smiled at Luo Lianqing, and it made her feel even worse. The whistle blew on the court. Everyone's attention shifted to the court. Chapter 23. Not everyone likes long legs. Wensu was indeed good at playing basketball, and had played with Zhao Li and the others before. But it was true that he had never played with anyone else in the class. So at first, no one guarded him at all, and no one passed the ball to him. Wensu was quite happy with the situation. Zhou Qi was worthy of being on the school team, and he scored several consecutive baskets. It's just that he's so good that he gets the most defensive attention. So when the ball was helplessly thrown into Wensu's hands, Zhou Qi had actually given up on the ball. There was only one person on the opposite side who even pretended to run towards Wensu. After all, the distance was a 3-point shot. Bang! The ball went in. Everyone on the court froze, except Lin Fan, who let out a cry of well done, one. Luo Yanqing watched as Wen Su leapt lightly and the ball fell perfectly into the basket. She heard a few girls say, wow, Wen Su can play basketball, and he looks good without his glasses, just a little bit handsome. She looked at the teenager running on the court, and it seemed that he would always make her notice something different. At first, everyone might have thought he was just lucky. But after the second and third three-pointers Wen Su made, there were more people guarding him. Zhou Qi gave him a thumbs up from afar. The other boys in the class started to get excited. With Zhou Qi and Wen Su, they were sure to win. At the end of the first half, they were already 25 points ahead of the other team. During the halftime break, Lin Fan asked breathlessly, "Didn't you say you were just going to play casually?" Wen Su also panted, but his panting was not as exaggerated as Lin Fan's. He took a sip of water because someone said that the winner would treat everyone to dinner. He finished and lightly curled the corners of his mouth. Lin Fan was stunned. This little one has something going on. He was just about to ask. Zhou Qi walked over to Wen Su. Wen Su looked at him and met his gaze with a measuring look. "You're very good. Let's play together sometime," Zhou Qi said with a smile. Wen Su said with little expression, "You're also very good. Let's play together if we have the chance." Zhou Qi nodded, then leaned close to Wen Su's ear and whispered, "Sure, we can play together sometime, but I'm the one who's going to be chasing you, sister." The meaning of these words was clear: Wen Su should not mess with her. Zhou Qi had just noticed that Luo Yanqing had smiled at Wen Su many times. He was a womanizer and knew girls very well. Luo Yanqing is different from Wen Su. This made him feel a little uncomfortable, but Wen Su is not someone he dislikes, especially if he plays the ball well. So Zhou Qi came to tell him this, which was also a greeting, hoping that Wen Su would understand. I don't know if Wen Su understood or not, but he just looked at him with a strange look and then nodded. Zhou Qi, he looked so calm that he seemed stupid. Fortunately, at this time, he saw Wang Meng walking over, so he changed the subject. Good luck later. And then he left. Wen Su looked at the back of Zhou Qi's head and didn't quite understand how someone who harassed girls with their words could think they could get a girl. Thinking about the look of grievance in Luo Lianqing's eyes just now, Wen Su felt that he really needed to teach Zhou Qi a lesson. His eyes flashed. Wen Su, I didn't realize you were so good at basketball. Why didn't you play with us before? Did you look down on us? Wang Meng's voice was strange when it sounded. Are you sick, Wang Meng? Lin Fan said unhappily, and no one asked Xiao Wen to join before. Wen Su looked at Wang Meng and was basically sure that he might have really been broken up with, except that Wen Su felt quite wronged in this matter. I'm not some football star, why would anyone look down on me? I remember once before I wanted to play, but you told the others that I couldn't, so I didn't go. Wen Su's tone was very light, to avoid embarrassing you. Wang Meng was so angry that his eyes were red as he looked at Wen Su, who didn't look like he was feeling anything. I don't know what Wen likes about him? Just because he has a good-looking face? Wen Su was annoyed at the way Wang Meng looked at him. After being dumped, he was acting like a mad dog, biting people everywhere. The halftime break was quickly approaching. Lin Fan and Wen Su put down the water in their hands and ran over. Lin Fan also turned his head and glanced at Wang Meng, who was glaring at their backs. He gave a little sound and said, "Wen, you should avoid Wang Meng for a while." Wen Su was a little puzzled. Ha? Have you watched the news? I'm afraid he'll throw acid on your head. Lin Fan's tone was full of worry. Wen Su, no need to be so harsh, thank you. There was no doubt that Wen Su and his team won the second half, with a score of 23 points. Everyone was very happy at the end. Many boys have also begun to change their opinions of Wen Su. Wen Su looked at you, who are usually gentle and refined, and you have good stamina. You're also good at playing basketball. One of the boys laughed, and he was one of the boys who had previously requested in the group chat to replace Wang Meng and who really wanted to win. Wen Su smiled and said, "You guys are not bad either." After exercise, people are more excited, and Wen Su was no exception. The girls watching the game next to him were also cheering. Luo Lianqing looked at the three girls next to him holding the underwater. She glanced at the water in her hands and guessed that Wen Su wouldn't be able to use it either. He seemed to be more popular than she had imagined. Luo Yiqing narrowed her eyes and watched Wen Su shake his head at a few girls and walk to where she had put her glasses. Luo Wuqing took out her phone and sent Wensu a text message before leaving. She was still afraid that Zhou Qi would react and pester her. Wensu walked over to the chair, picked up his phone and glanced at it. It had a message from Luo Wuqing. Awesome! I won! If I don't eat dinner with my teammates tonight, I'll invite you to dinner, but if I celebrate with my teammates, I'll invite you next time I'm leaving. He glanced at the audience and sure enough, the seat where Luo Liaoqing had just been sitting was empty. Wensu wiped his glasses and put them on, his face expressionless again. Wensu. At this time, a voice came from behind, sounding a little familiar. Wensu turned his head and saw Wang Meng's ex-girlfriend, whose name seemed to be Wen, but exactly what her name was, Wensu really forgot. This girl had chased after him for a long time when he first entered university. But Wensu had clearly rejected her many times, but she never gave up. Later, Wang Meng started chasing her, and slowly the two of them got together, and Wensu felt relieved. At this time, Wensu looked at her again as she stood in front of him with a bottle of water, and his head hurt a little. What kind of nonsense is this? No TV drama would dare to show it like this. Wang Meng wouldn't really come and pour sulfuric acid, would he? Wensu sighed, is there something wrong? Wang Meng was just over there. He pointed in a direction. Who knew that the girl in front of him shook her head and said, I broke up with Wang Meng. She looked at Wensu seriously, I've been with him for over a year, and I feel like I still can't like him. What does it have to do with me? Wensu felt really bad. Then he heard Wen say, Yan Ran said you like long legs, so do I still have a chance? Wensu, it's not like everyone who likes long legs likes them all. Chapter 24, or maybe I really like this type? Wensu sighed and said, I'm sorry, we really aren't a good match. I said that many times before. Fong Wen's face looked a little unpleasant when she heard Wensu's reply. She squeezed the water in her hand and wondered why she didn't want to give it a try. I really like you. Since freshman year. Many people had already noticed this side of the room. They were all classmates or students from the same department. Fong Wen was Wang Meng's girlfriend before, and now she was standing in front of Wensu, offering him water. While Wang Meng stood not far away, watching, his face turning green. Isn't that Wang Meng's girlfriend? I heard they broke up. You guys don't know, do you? Since the beginning of the freshman year. Various discussions have sounded. Wensu was a little impatient. He's not a monkey in a zoo, and really doesn't like being surrounded and watched. He glanced at the time and said to Lin Fanfan, who had been staring in amazement the whole time, let's go, I have something tonight. Hey, just now they said they were going to eat together. Lin Fan came back to his senses and grabbed Wensu, aren't you going? No, I have a date. Wensu said indifferently, adding that it was quite an important friend. Lin Fan let out a sound, and when he saw Wang Meng walking over, he quickly let go, afraid that the two would fight, so he quickly left. Wensu nodded, grabbed his things and was about to turn and leave. Fong Wen's face looked very bad, and she even doubted whether Qin Yanran had deliberately misled her. Didn't she say that Wensu liked long legs? But his attitude didn't seem like it. Wensu, is it because I talked to Wang Meng about you that you mind? I have never liked him. These words were not spoken quietly, and everyone on the court fell silent. Wensu was annoyed. At the beginning, the reason he refused this when so many times in such a decisive manner was because he really didn't like her aggressiveness. At this time, there was obvious impatience on Wensu's face. I don't like you, and I didn't like you at the beginning, and I won't like you now. As for your relationship and feelings with Wang Meng, they have nothing to do with me. He frowned at Fong Wen and said, Wang Meng quite likes you, don't take people's feelings lightly. Wensu then walked away without looking back. He had to go back and take a shower, then go to dinner. Qin Yanran stood quite far away, looking at Fong Wen in the middle of the court, and finally looked at the back of Wensu's figure. Her eyes were flashing, not knowing what she was thinking. Wensu didn't care about any of this and went straight back to the apartment. After taking a shower, he found a few more messages on his phone. Lin Fan's, other classmates in the class, and Luo Liaoqing's. Luo Liaoqing's was sent 3 minutes ago, I'm home, call me when you're leaving. Thanks. JPG. Wensu replied with an okay, is 15 minutes enough? Enough for what? A second reply came from there. Do you girls put on makeup and change clothes? Wensu didn't notice that there was a distinct smile in his eyes. I don't need to when I go out with you. Along with this message sounded was the knock on the door of his house. Wensu let out a sound of disgust. He had wanted to get dressed first, but for some reason, he paused. So he went to the door shirtless. At the door stood Luo Yiqing, holding her phone. She had changed out of her tracksuit and put on some casual clothes, as it wasn't that cold anymore. She wasn't wearing a jacket. Her sleeves were puffy and white, and she had paired a long denim skirt with a slightly short top, so when she lifted her hands, a small section of her fair waist was revealed. It was very eye-catching. Hey, Luo Lianqing looked up from her phone, but froze. The person in front of her had obviously just taken a shower, and without his glasses, his damp hair was casually brushed back, revealing his delicate and handsome facial features. There was also a towel around his neck, and the water droplets dripping from his hair passed directly from his chest, across his six-pack abs, and disappeared down his mermaid-like waistline into some gray sweatpants. He was a bit of a manly temptress. Luo Lianqing's face began to blush, and she looked away, not knowing where to look for a moment. When Su turned as if he hadn't noticed, and went inside. Come in, I'll change. Luo Lianqing nodded and followed him in. She couldn't help but think to herself as she followed Wensu's gaze, Wensu looks so gentle and refined, but he has muscles. Wensu went inside, put on some clothes, changed his pants, and came out, still holding his glasses. Luo Lianqing was still standing in the same place. She had just glanced at Wensu's house, which was basically the same as hers, except that it was more simply decorated. And somewhat unexpectedly, Wensu's house was much cleaner than hers. Sorry, I forgot to ask you to sit down. Would you like a drink of water? Sit down for a while? Wensu sighed as he put his glasses on, a little uncomfortable having guests. Then you'll get used to it if I come here often. Luo Lianqing said without thinking, stopping him from going to get some water. Staring at his glasses, she asked, Are you seriously nearsighted? Wensu reached out and touched his glasses. No, they're just plain glasses. Then why do you wear them? Luo Lianqing asked, a little puzzled. She had just noticed that Wensu looked more familiar without his glasses. She wasn't sure if it was just her imagination. I look like my mother, and without glasses I look a bit more feminine. Wensu explained, and then saw Luo Yiqing reach over and gently remove his glasses. This action seemed a bit intimate to Wensu, but he did not stop her. But you actually look very good without glasses. Luo Yiqing looked into his eyes and said, You are indeed delicate, but I wouldn't say feminine. The distance between the two of them was actually a bit at this moment, and Wensu could even see her clearly defined eyelashes. His gaze became a little more serious, and he reached out to take the glasses from her hand. Their hands touched briefly, and then quickly separated again. Wensu took the glasses and took a step back, then put them on. I'm used to it. Luo Lianqing let out a little gasp, suddenly feeling a little concerned about his movement of taking a step back. Wensu reached out and felt his own heart, which had just quickened. Okay, you pick where you want to go. Luo Lianqing was a little happy. I saw an internet celebrity hot pot restaurant before, I heard it's not bad, let's try it. After saying that, she turned her head and glanced at Wensu, who was lagging 2 steps behind, and hurriedly followed. Wensu paused for a moment before closing the door with him and standing next to her waiting for the elevator. The elevator was still on the first floor. Luo Lianqing suddenly said, looking at the shadows of the two of them reflected on the elevator door, I didn't expect you to be so thin, you really have a good figure. Is this called clothes make the thin, undressing makes the meat? Wensu thought about the deliberate action he had just taken and suddenly felt a little embarrassed. He grunted in agreement, I guess so. But I also have a six-pack. Luo Lianqing said with a smile, her bright eyes narrowing. Wensu suddenly felt something was wrong with him. He looked at Luo Lianqing's pretty face and wondered if he really liked this type of girl. Chapter 25. Are you capable of falling in love? Luo Lianqing didn't hear his reply, and she tilted her head to look over, just catching Wensu's somewhat complicated gaze. Luo Lianqing froze, and then felt her heart suddenly beating a little faster. Ding! The elevator arrived. Wensu averted his gaze, and said, Here we are, let's go up. Luo Lianqing didn't say anything and followed him upstairs. The two fell into a short silence. Wensu, where are you from? Luo Lianqing suddenly asked. Yu City. Wensu said, Both my parents are there. Luo Lianqing let out an "oh," her tone a little disappointed. Before, she actually had a ridiculous thought in her head, because Wensu's appearance without his glasses just now was really like the person she was looking for, even if the gender seemed to be wrong. But Wensu is from Yu City, it's too far away, he can't be hers. Luo Liaoqing couldn't say why she was disappointed, she just felt a little flustered by Wensu's gaze earlier. What's the point of asking this? Wensu looked at her in a daze and couldn't help but ask. No, I'm just a little curious, you don't look like a northerner. Luo Liaoqing smiled. Wensu nodded, is it about my face? He didn't seem to care, that's why I wear glasses. The topic was quickly brought up, because Luo Liaoqing suddenly mentioned that Wensu had been confessed to on the basketball court, and the school forum was full of posts about it. She looked at Wensu curiously, what did you feel? I heard that the girl has liked you for 3 years. Lu Lianqing frowned, but I've seen her walking with Wang Meng before, isn't she in a relationship with Wang Meng? How could she like you for 3 years? Wensu was a little helpless. The elevator arrived, and he reached out and took her arm, quickly letting go. Let's go. How do you like it? Luo Liaoqing only felt his large palm make her heart beat faster through her clothes. She heard the helplessness in his tone and laughed a little. Too popular and troubled? I'm not as popular as you. Wensu glanced at her and opened the car-hailing app on his phone. Rixing department store? Luo Liaoqing nodded. Yes, that's the place. She said a little discontentedly, I don't want any bad guys. Thinking about how Zhou Qi had just been messaging her nonstop to invite her to dinner, Luo Lianqing had a headache. She suddenly understood a little of Wensu's helplessness. We're all so miserable. Wensu called for a good car. Seeing her pretty little face crumpled up, he found it a little funny. I'm suffering. A lot of the time I feel like I don't like guys either. I really don't like being chased. Luo Qingqing muttered under her breath, tapping her phone. But I don't like girls either. Wensu's fingers stiffened at this. No way? No way? No one just met someone of the opposite sex they have a crush on and is going to slam into a wall? Wensu felt a little miserable. He opened his mouth to say something, but Luo Qingqing let out a breath. Never mind, I'm not going to dwell on it. I'm not getting married anyway. Wensu sighed, and the bus arrived. Take it easy, at least I'm still her only friend of the opposite sex. And it's probably just that I haven't met other members of the opposite sex, and I need to be sure. When the two arrived, they found that there was already a long queue at the hot pot restaurant. Even though Luo Liaoqing had already taken a number on the official account in advance, there were still 26 tables in front of them. This is hot pot, how long do we have to wait? Luo Liaoqing considered that Wensu must be hungry after playing basketball, so she suggested changing to another restaurant. Wensu was indeed hungry and didn't object. She just didn't expect Luo Liaoqing to end up choosing a Cantonese restaurant. Would you go out for Cantonese food? When you're homesick? Luo Liaoqing asked curiously with wide eyes after ordering. No, because I can cook it myself. Wensu said with some helplessness. I'm not that homesick either, and my relationship with my parents is just a so-so. Luo Liaoqing froze for a moment. My relationship with my parents is not good either. She seemed a little happy as if she had found a common ground in their relationship. Do you cook well? I haven't tried it yet. If you want, I'll cook for you next time. Wensu smiled and completely forgot that Jolly could only eat his cooking when he was in a bad mood, and it was usually difficult to even enter his house. Great. Luo Lianqing nodded. She felt that Wensu was like a treasure, and the closer she got to him, the more she discovered his charm. No wonder so many girls liked him. Wensu held up his phone, and on it were the Baidu search terms. How do I know if I like someone? You blush and your heart races when you see them. The most direct way is to want to sleep with them. I want to be nice to her. Wensu looked around and felt that it was really not reliable at all. Just forget it. As a result, when he looked up, he met Luo Lianqing's big eyes staring at him. What's wrong? No, it seems that you are quite busy. Speaking of this major, do you plan to graduate and go to graduate school? Luo Lianqing suddenly thought of this. Generally speaking, those who major in this field mostly work for their own company. When Su is from U City, will he go back? Lu Yanqing felt a little upset when she thought about this. When Su shook his head and said he would not go back to study. He did want to, but if he studied again, Uncle Ugly would probably have to kneel down and beg him, and the thought of that image was terrifying. So will you go back? Lu Yanqing didn't notice that her tone was a little urgent, and her face wasn't very good either. This question made Wen Su pause for a moment. He thought of something and didn't answer directly, but instead asked, "You don't want me to go back?" No. We're too far apart if you go back. Luo Yuqing shook her head honestly, her tone unhappy. The distance will make contact fade. Then I won't go back. Wensu said with a smile. Luo Yuqing didn't expect him to answer so decisively, and to say that he wouldn't go back. Her heartbeat suddenly started to feel wrong again. Why wouldn't you go back? Didn't you say you didn't want me to go back? Wensu glanced at her, raising an eyebrow. Did you just lie to me? I really don't want to. Luo Yuqing retorted directly, and she hadn't lied. She felt like something was wrong with her. When she heard Wensu say that he wouldn't go back because of her words, she seemed to be a little happy. Luo Yuqing actually has quite high emotional and intellectual intelligence. She always knew that she was different from Wensu, either because of the social death when they met, or because Wensu looked a lot like her former friend. But Wensu was just different in her eyes, so she can't help but pay attention to him. She even took the initiative to become friends with him. To her, friends are a very precious position. Luo Yuqing's gaze flashed thoughtfully, but the feeling Wensu gave her seemed to be different from that of an ordinary friend. She was a little troubled, and even wanted to figure out this strange feeling quickly. Wensu, will you fall in love? Luo Yuqing suddenly asked. Chapter 26, Going to the Movies. Wensu was taken aback by her question, and looking at her face, which was full of confusion, he wondered what he was thinking again. So he sighed and said, I don't have any plans to do that at the moment, and I haven't met the right person yet. Luo Yuqing's eyebrows knitted together. She hadn't met the right person yet. She suddenly felt even more uncomfortable when she thought about how Wensu had said many times before that he didn't have feelings for her. In fact, she had pretty good conditions, right? Why didn't he like her? She lowered her long eyelashes, and she had long legs too, didn't she? Luo Lianqing was startled and came back to her senses. Why was she unhappy? Wasn't it because Wensu didn't like her that she had dared to be his friend? Coincidentally, the waiter started serving the food at this time, and the two started eating without anyone continuing the conversation they had just had. Luo Lianqing had something on her mind, and Wensu was also a little annoyed because she had inexplicably felt a stirring in her heart and the other person had not noticed. This Cantonese restaurant is quite authentic. Luo Lianqing nodded after she finished eating and said, Not bad, let's come again next time. Wensu couldn't help but sigh when she mentioned next time so naturally, but still nodded, Okay, let's come again next time. Luo Lianqing paid the bill when it was time to pay, because she said there was a bonus for winning the basketball game. Wensu didn't argue with her. Ben-kun also said in the class group that you have to treat us to dinner, there's a bonus. Wensu looked at Ben-kun and said. Luo Lianqing nodded, not that she couldn't do it, but I'll invite you when I'm done with this semester. Wensu froze for a moment, you won't be a tutor next semester? Yes, next semester you'll all be seniors, and most of you will be out on internships, so the tutors won't be important anymore. Luo Lianqing suddenly remembered something when she mentioned this. You previously applied to live away from home because you said you had found an internship, but now I haven't seen you go out to work. You're usually pretty punctual for class. Wensu let out a sound of surprise. I quit that job after a month, it wasn't a good fit. Luo Lianqing let out a sound of exasperation and began to worry a little. It was quite difficult to find a good internship in this major. Wensu found her troubled expression a little amusing, but he couldn't tell her that he didn't need an internship. He saw a cinema not far away. Going to the movies? Huh? Luo Lianqing looked up. There were quite a few people queuing to buy tickets. She was tempted, and going to the movies seemed like a good way to find out what was going on. Sure, it's still early, she said, smiling at Wensu. Wensu never would have guessed that she wanted to watch a romantic movie when they bought the tickets. It was a small movie with a small subject matter, and usually only couples would buy tickets for it. He glanced at Luo Lianqing, who was choosing a popcorn combo, and didn't say anything. After buying the tickets and popcorn, they only had to wait 5 or 6 minutes before they were admitted. Not many people watched this movie, and there were only 8 people in the theater, including the 2 of them. The other 6 were 3 couples, and they had bought scattered seats, all in the back. The only 2 people in the middle were them. After Luo Lianqing sat down, she was silent for a while, feeling as if she had made a mistake. Wensu found this a bit amusing. It feels like we're sitting right in the middle of the stage, with the light shining right on us. She sighed, and in the corner of her eye she saw a few couples sitting in corner seats. Lowering her voice a little, she asked, Shouldn't we be sitting in the corner too? Wensu leaned in a little, lowering his voice as well. Everyone else is a couple, and they're sitting in the corner so they can make out. Won-soo looked at her face, which was close enough to be in the spotlight. He could even see the little hairs on her face, and the pretty, curled eyelashes blinked so fast that they tickled his heart. Finally, his gaze settled on her slightly open pink lips, which were slightly open in surprise. Won-soo cursed under his breath, his Adam's apple sliding, and he felt a little dry in his throat. Just then, the lights went out and the movie was about to start. Won-soo let out a sigh of relief. The lights went out just in time, otherwise he would have been a little embarrassed. There were sounds coming from the corner, and the occasional little giggle from a girl. Luo Lianqing also sat up straight and sat back in her seat. Neither of them said anything, and they watched the movie start. Luo Wuqing couldn't help but glance at Won-soo in the light of the movie. His eyes were hard to see because of the reflection from his glasses. All she could see was the high nose bridge and thin lips. He really is quite good-looking, Luo Wuqing couldn't help but think. Noticing that Won-soo reached out for a drink, Luo Wuqing, for some reason, also reached out her hand. Their hands met and they both got the same Coke. The Coke was very cold, but the hands that met seemed to be burning. Won-soo glanced down at their hands, and the position was more like he was wrapping her hand in his. He looked at Luo Wuqing sideways, and she was staring at the movie screen as if she hadn't noticed. Won-soo's hand moved, and he gently let go, even though the cola was his. After he let go, Luo Wuqing seemed to have just noticed, and she turned to look at him with apologetic eyes. Then she picked up the cola and handed it to Won-soo. Won-soo took it and took a sip. Seeing Luo Wuqing pick up the other cup of cola and take a sip too, his gaze fixed on the movie screen as if the movie was very good. However, Won-soo felt that once you start watching this kind of movie, you already know the ending as soon as you open your mouth. There's nothing good to watch. The two of them touched each other unintentionally up to 5 or 6 times during the movie. Won-soo was not a fool, so how could he believe that there could be so many coincidences? When the climax of the movie came, the several couples behind them didn't know who it was, and they let out some ambiguous sounds. Won-soo heard it, and Luo Lianqing heard it too. Fortunately for Won-soo, it was just a reflexive glance at Luo Lianqing. Then he noticed that she seemed to be a little embarrassed, her face was a little red, but those beautiful eyes seemed to be uncontrollably wanting to look behind. Her head followed. Won-soo sighed, reached out and covered her face, which was about to turn away, and whispered, "What are you looking at?" Luo Yueqing's face was gently turned back by him, her big innocent eyes full of innocence, and her rosy lips moved slightly. "I'm a little curious. Children shouldn't look at this." Won-soo slightly forced her face to be straight, then touched her hair when he let go. Luo Wuqing instantly forgot about the sound behind her. She heard her own heartbeat like thunder. The face that had just been touched by Won-soo seemed to still retain the warmth of his palm. Luo Wuqing reached out and touched her own heart, as if she wanted to make sure that she already had the answer. She had no heart to watch the movie behind her, her mind was full of things. When the lights came on at the end of the movie, neither of them moved. The young couple behind them walked intimately as two pairs. Won-soo also stood up. "Let's go." Chapter 27, I think I've fallen for someone who doesn't like me. When they came out, the two walked one behind the other. Won-soo noticed that she was distracted and almost got hit by a child while walking. "Be careful." Won-soo quickly pulled her hand to prevent her from hitting the rampaging child. The child's mother pulled the child and said apologetically, "I'm sorry." Luo Lianqing then came back to her senses. Her gaze fell on Won-soo's hand holding hers, and certainty flashed in her eyes. "What are you thinking about? You're not paying attention." Won-soo sighed, and he wasn't even walking properly, so that no one bumped into him. "No, I was thinking about the movie just now." Luo Wuqing gave him a smile, and she didn't mention letting go of his hand. Instead, Won-soo himself reacted and let go. "What's there to think about? You can guess the ending." Won-soo's tone was helpless, and he looked at the road. "I know, let's go back." Luo Lianqing said that she was in a hurry and had to go back to analyze it with Meow Meow. Just as the two were about to walk out of the movie theater and prepare to go back, they encountered Zhou walking towards them. The point is that the person who kept saying that he wanted to chase after Luo Lianqing was still carrying a girl on his arm. The girl was quite pretty and had a good figure, quite in line with the big-breasted lowly type that Luo Lianqing had mentioned before. Zhou obviously didn't expect to flip over at the entrance to the cinema, and there was an awkward flash on his face. His gaze then flicked back and forth between Won-soo and Luo Wuqing, eliciting a smile and a flash of understanding in his eyes. "I wondered why she was so hard to woo. You were so blind on the court." It turns out they're a couple. There was a hint of helplessness in his tone. A couple who still don't dare declare their sovereignty. You're really pathetic, Wen-su. Wen-su didn't quite understand how someone could have such a thick skin and be so aggressive. He was about to speak when Luo Lianqing, who had taken a half step behind, spoke first. Zhou Qi, just because you speak loudly doesn't mean you're right. Her gaze fell on the girl who was curiously watching them, and since you have a girlfriend, don't bother me. Zhou Qi's face turned even more embarrassed, and he tried to pull back his hand. If you had said earlier that you had a boyfriend, I wouldn't have bothered you, and... It's not a boyfriend, we just happened to meet. Wen-su interrupted him with a faint smile, his gaze falling on the girl at his side. We didn't have any intimate contact. These words caused hesitation to flash across Zhou Qi's face. Indeed, they had walked out one after the other. Could it be that he really had misunderstood? His female companion next to him listened for a while and sort of figured out what was going on. She pinched Zhou Qi a little disgruntledly. What's wrong with you? Luo Lianqing's expressionless face had turned a little pale from Wen-su's denial. She looked at Wen-su, but saw that he was looking at Zhou Qi and his date. So he really does like the big-breasted lowly type? Wen-su had no idea what she was thinking, and had no intention of watching Zhou Qi explain to his date. He just turned his head and looked at Luo Lianqing, and froze when he met her sad gaze. Why does she seem a little sad now? Because Zhou Qi is sad? Wen-su couldn't help but frown when he thought about this. He glanced at Zhou Qi with some annoyance, hoping that you won't say anything stupid. After all, neither Miss Luo nor I want to be bothered by rumors. After saying this, he didn't look at Zhou Qi and signaled Luo Lianqing to go together. Zhou Qi just watched them walk one after the other. The girl by his side was still asking, Zhou Qi, what do you mean? She's better looking than me? Zhou Qi withdrew his gaze, feeling a little annoyed. Come on, you're not my girlfriend. The girl's big eyes stared at him, full of discontent. What exactly don't you like about me? I just don't like Lolas. Zhou Qi looked at her speechlessly, pulled his hand back hard, and hurriedly finished watching the movie and went back. As he said this, he turned his head to look at Luo Lianqing's back again. Since Wen-su said they weren't boyfriend and girlfriend, could he still continue to pursue her? Wen-su from this side called a taxi and got in with Luo Lianqing. It was just that Luo Lianqing seemed a little down and didn't say much. Wen-su thought it might be because of Zhou Qi, who was also in a bad mood, so neither of them said anything. The driver in front looked at them a few times in the rearview mirror, wanting to say something but holding back. Finally, when they got off the taxi, the driver said, Young man, go woo your girlfriend. You're so lucky to have such a beautiful girlfriend. Wen-su froze for a moment, and then he heard Luo Lianqing say next to him, Thank you, uncle, but we're not boyfriend and girlfriend. Wen-su lowered his eyes upon hearing this and didn't say anything. His attitude of not speaking in tacit consent made Luo Lianqing even more unhappy. So the two walked one after the other in the sound of the uncle's apologies. When they got off the elevator on the 8th floor, Luo Lianqing said without much emotion, Goodbye. Wen-su nodded, Good night. Then he watched her open the door and go in. Wen-su stood in the doorway for a while. Then he turned around and opened the door to go in as well. After entering, he didn't turn on the lights and walked directly to the sofa, where he sat down. After sitting for a while, he sighed, Fuck, it's hard to meet someone you like, and it looks like she really doesn't like me. He couldn't help but frown. Didn't he say he didn't like Zhou Qi? Why was he still upset because he saw him with another girl? Even if he doesn't like him, it's fine, but Zhou Qi is obviously a playboy, what's the point of liking him? Sure enough, women are a difficult creature to understand. Wen-su stood up a little irritably, walked over to the TV cabinet, pulled open the drawer and took out a pack of cigarettes, then ran to the balcony to smoke. On the other side, Luo Lianqing looked unhappy. She came back and perfunctorily pulled the egg yolk and casually played with it a bit before going into the bathroom to take a shower. After taking a shower, she looked at herself in the mirror. She looked pretty good. She was not inferior to Zhou Qi's female companion, was she? These breasts, this waist, these legs, these proportions, aren't they pretty good? The thought that Wen-su looked at someone else's female companion made Luo Lianqing angry, and he even denied it so directly. Just now, she discovered that she had been a little bit tempted, which annoyed Luo Lianqing to death. She casually took a bathrobe and put it on before walking out. Looking listless, she sat on the bed for a while. She still took out her phone and dialed the number of her best friend. It rang for a while before being answered. Luo Lianqing, you better be in trouble. Meow Meow's voice had a somewhat gnashing of teeth, meaning, I'm on a date with my male god. Luo Liaoqing let out a sound, her mood not looking good. So I'll call you back? Meow Meow noticed over there, her voice becoming a little more normal. What's wrong? You're in a bad mood? What's happened? She whispered something else over there, then ignored the other person's entreaties and left, presumably. Luo Liaoqing sighed, Meow Meow, you take care. I've got a big problem. It seems like I've fallen for someone who doesn't like me. Chapter 28, He Likes Big-Breasted Lolitas. Meow Meow was silent for a moment, then asked, male or female? Luo Liaoqing choked, and after a while said, of course it's a guy. That's good. Meow Meow was obviously relieved. Interrupted like this, Luo Liaoqing's mood improved a little, but she was still a little sullen. What's good about it? He doesn't like me, he likes big-breasted lolitas. She sighed. I just realized that I seem to have a slight feeling for him. And then I found out that he doesn't like my type. No, he likes big-breasted lolas. You're just not a loli, but that's quite easy to fix. Meow Meow comforted her. Tell me who it is first. Meow Meow knows her best friend very well. Although she seems sunny, cheerful, and approachable on the surface, she is actually a little snail with a shell. After all these years, she doesn't even have many friends, so how can she suddenly say that she has met a boy she is attracted to? She's so naive, she's afraid of being cheated on. Luo Liaoqing sighed, I'm a tutor this semester, right? He's a student in my class. No. Luo, is it that exciting? Teacher-student romance? Meow Meow's voice instantly became agitated. What romance? There's still more than a month until the holidays, right? And I'm not his teacher anymore. Luo Liaoqing was a bit speechless. At most, I'm his senior, and that's not the point. Do you remember the times I was really desperate before? Everyone he meets is him. Luo Liaoqing roughly described the process of her meeting Wensu, becoming friends, and then having a crush on him. Afterwards, she asked, what should I do? Meow Meow. If you're not sisters, what do you think? She couldn't help but sigh. You've known him for 2 months? It's almost been 2 months, what's the problem? Luo Liaoqing asked in return. No problem, I just don't know whether to call you a social retard or what. If I knew that my neighbor had repeatedly encountered someone I'd call a social retard, I might choose to move, rather than become friends with him. Meow Meow said honestly, I couldn't stand it, I think I'd feel awkward just by seeing him. I wouldn't, he's a very nice person. Luo Liaoqing whispered, he's not the kind of person who makes people feel awkward. Okay, it's fine that you like him now. But how can you just assume that he likes big-breasted lolitas just because he looked at another girl? Meow Meow couldn't understand. Luo Liaoqing sighed, but he just denied it directly. We're not boyfriends and girlfriends, it hurts. But think about it, your current status, if you don't deny it and let people see and talk nonsense, it will also have a great impact on you. Meow Meow seriously analyzed, it's rare that Luo likes someone, and she has to give good advice. You can't use this as a standard for judgment, you can try it out. Luo Liaoqing looked at the lamp above her head, so how should I try it out? You have to. Wensu finished smoking 2 cigarettes in a depressed mood, then went inside, smelling his body with some disgust before taking a shower. After the shower, he turned on the computer for the rare occasion, and then searched for a bunch of things by tapping on it. There were also some websites with colors. He clicked on one at random, looked at it for a moment, then frowned and closed it. What kind of taste does Chi have this week? Wensu tapped on the computer expressionlessly for a while, then turned it off. He went straight to bed. Not far away, Chi, who had just returned to the dormitory from school, took out his phone a little tiredly. As a result, as soon as he unlocked it, a shrill, high-pitched and ambiguous sound came from the phone. It was still mainly a man's voice, and all Chi could see was a white blur in front of him. Then his face turned green. He pressed the volume button a little clumsily, but the screen remained, and no matter how he clicked on the 2 men, they were still on his phone screen. The people in the dormitory heard the sound and let out a groan. Brother Chi, are you serious? You're even playing it on the loudspeaker? The lights aren't even off yet. Brother Chi, let me see. One roommate came over with a smile on his face, but his face turned green too. Holy shit. Brother Chi, you. Fuck. My phone is infected. Shit. Joe Chi's face was ugly as he tried to force the phone to shut down, but he failed. In the end, the phone just played all night, and finally ran out of battery the next morning. Jochi just threw it away, and never figured out how his phone got infected. Wonsu felt much better after a good night's sleep. At the same time, he began to think about how to save Luo Lianqing's poor sense of beauty, and why she liked Jochi. Just because of his good-looking face? But Luo Lianqing shouldn't be so shallow, should she? While Wensu was making breakfast with no expression on his face, there was a knock on the door. He paused in his movements. Usually, this time of day, only Luo Lianqing would come over. He turned off the stove and went to open the door. Sure enough, Luo Lianqing was standing there, holding a cat. She was still wearing her pajamas, and her face was not made up, so she must have just woken up too. Good morning. I'm here for breakfast. Have you made breakfast yet? She held up the cat, and Yoke said he missed her. Yoke meowed at Wenza. Wenza's gaze fell from the person to the cat, and finally reached out to hug Yoke, slightly sideways. Come in. Luo Yueqing's face raised a smile, and she entered the room and got square root. And politely closed the door. Wensu turned his head and looked at her. What if I hadn't made breakfast? Then I'll invite you to go out for breakfast together. Luo Lianqing reached out and took the cat. I want to have breakfast with you today anyway. She said this with a straight face, looking a little spoiled. Wensu, however, felt a little better. Sit for a while, it won't take long. Do you want some noodles? Luo Lianqing sat obediently on the sofa with the cat in her arms, and said obediently, no problem if you want to eat. Wensu nodded and went into the kitchen. Luo Lianqing smiled secretly as she watched his back. Meow Meow was right, Wensu didn't dislike her, and she might still have a chance. She stroked the Yoke and whispered, Yoke, I'll find you a brother-in-law, so you have to work hard too, okay? The Yoke looked at her and meowed helplessly. Wensu had already started to cook the noodles, but because of Luo Lianqing, he had to start again and opened the refrigerator to get 2 eggs. After frying, they were all put into the same bowl. He made breakfast quickly, carrying the noodles to the dining table. Come over. Then she saw her come over with the cat in her arms. You put the cat down, or you'll get cat hair in your mouth, Wensu said helplessly. I'm afraid Yoke will mess up your things. Luo Lianqing stood still with Yoke in her arms, looking innocent. But Wensu said, it's not important. Put the cat down and come and eat. Chapter 29, You must be very happy to be my girlfriend. Luo Lianqing obediently put down the cat and walked over. She looked at the noodles with 2 eggs on top and then at Wensu's bowl of noodles, which looked very plain with only 2 pieces of green vegetables. She suddenly remembered that Wensu seemed to still be a student. He didn't have a job yet and was renting a room, so he probably didn't have much money for living expenses. Luo Lianqing picked up the chopsticks and offered him one of the eggs. I'll just have one. As a token of my appreciation, let me buy you lunch? You cook? Wensu looked at her in surprise. Luo Lianqing shook her head. I can't cook. I can buy you lunch. Wensu. You eat out every day? More or less. I can't cook, so sometimes I order takeout. Luo Lianqing picked up the fried egg and took a bite. It's convenient to eat out. Wensu sighed and said, I'll cook lunch today, you come over and eat. Luo Lianqing's eyes lit up. Great, I'll go shopping. How about we go shopping downstairs together in a bit? I haven't really explored the food section yet. Wensu looked at those big, expectant eyes and really found it hard to refuse. He nodded, okay, I'll go down in a bit. Even though he actually already had the ingredients in the fridge, he still wanted to go to the supermarket with her. Luo Lianqing felt that she had made the right decision when she finally plucked up the courage to knock on the door after hesitating for so long this morning. Not only did she get a free breakfast and lunch, but she would also be able to go shopping with him later. After finishing the bowl of noodles, Luo Lianqing felt a little full. She reached out and touched her still flat stomach and said seriously, Wensu, you cook really well. Wensu nodded with a smile, thank you, I think so too. Luo Lianqing reached out to take the bowl and chopsticks from his hands, saying, you cook, I'll wash the dishes, okay? Wensu, however, dodged her, saying, you can't even cook, so I can't expect you to wash the dishes. Luo Lianqing followed him into the kitchen with some dissatisfaction, saying, that's not fair. Didn't you go to university abroad? If you can't cook, do you eat takeaways? Wensu didn't let her try this first time easily. Luo Lianqing simply stood next to him and stared at him as he washed the dishes. My previous roommate had a Chinese roommate, so I usually just gave a little extra when it came to food expenses. Wen-se nodded, looking at her sideways. Do you all share a flat? Yes, I actually went to high school abroad, and Luo Liaoqing frowned slightly. So did Wen-se not expect this, going abroad so early? I went abroad with my mother. Luo Lianqing obviously didn't want to continue the conversation, but she finished anyway. My parents are divorced, and my mother and I have been studying at a girls' school abroad because my mother doesn't want me to meet the opposite sex. Wen-se frowned. What about your future relationships? That's my business. After all, I'm already grown up now, and I have the right to make my own decisions. Luo Lianqing smiled and said, I'm free. Wen-se rinsed the bowl in his hands and looked at her. Yes, you are free. Luo Yuqing really liked the sight of him without his glasses, being able to look directly into his eyes. They were very gentle eyes, and her heart beat a little faster. Feeling her face beginning to heat up, she quickly averted her gaze. I'll go back and change. Shall we go to the supermarket to buy ingredients in a bit? Yes, you go back. Call me when you're ready. Wen-se watched as the area near her ear seemed to begin to flush a little, and a thoughtful look flashed in his eyes. I don't know if it's my imagination, but I always feel that something's wrong with Luo Yuqing today. Luo Yuqing let out a sigh, ran out, hugged the egg yolk, and returned. I'll let you know when I'm ready. Wen-se watched her slender back disappear at the door, and the door closed. He stood there for a while before turning and going into the bedroom to change. No matter what, it's much more convenient for her to take the initiative to approach him than for him to find a way to approach her. The two of them left the house together about 10 minutes later. Wen-se also noticed that she had changed into a suit that looked a bit too formal. Are you going out later? No. Luo Lianqing glanced at him, what's wrong? Well, seeing you dressed so formally, I thought you had something to do. Wen-se withdrew his gaze. This suit really brought out the advantages of Luo Lianqing's figure, and it was very eye-catching when she walked down the street. The man she had just taken the elevator with kept ogling her. Luo Liaoqing blinked, wondering if she was being too obvious. But her face didn't show it. I just bought this dress and never had a chance to wear it before, so I wanted to wear it today. Do you like it? After she finished speaking, she stared straight at Wen-se, waiting for his reply. Wen-se glanced at the dress quickly, then looked away. It's nice. Luo Liaoqing was a little disappointed. The dress had indeed not been worn much because she felt that it showed off her figure a little too much, and she didn't really like it. But from Wen-se's reaction, it seemed like he didn't like it either? Or was she just not attractive enough? So the two of them fell silent again. Wen-se took Luo Yuqing to the fresh food section of the supermarket and asked her what she wanted to eat. Luo Yuqing looked at the majority of the vegetables, most of which she couldn't tell the difference between the types, and was a little dazed. I don't know, I'm not picky, I'll eat whatever you make. Wen-se looked at her and smiled, saying, You're quite easy to feed. Right, do you want to raise me? Luo Lianqing answered without thinking. After she said it, she felt that something was wrong with her words. Wen-se's inquisitive eyes fell on her. His tone was hesitant. Did she really mean that he could raise her? Luo Lianqing coughed lightly. It's not that, but if you want to raise me, it's still possible. Her words were a bit ambiguous. Wen-se thought about it for a rare moment. Was that what he thought she meant? But wasn't the change a bit big? Wasn't he still feeling down about Zhou Qi's situation last night? His silence seemed to Luo Lianqing like a rejection. She felt a little let down and smiled to herself, but I don't need to be taken care of, I can support myself. Wen-se nodded, but the words on the tip of his tongue were swallowed back. In the end, he took her to pick out tomatoes and broccoli, and bought beef and fish. When he finally saw the chicken, he asked her, Do you like poached chicken? Luo Lianqing thought he wanted to buy it, nodded, and said she quite liked it. Then next time I'll ask my dad to send one over, the chickens here don't make a good poached chicken. It almost tastes off. Wen-se said, Big deal. So he bought half a chicken anyway, and said, Today we'll make do with chicken and mouth-wateringly delicious sauce. The person who will be your girlfriend in the future is definitely very lucky, Luo Lianqing muttered, handsome, can cook, and gentle. Handsome? Wen-se's feet paused for a moment. How does that compare to Zhou Qi? After saying that, he just looked at Luo Yuqing, who looked completely lost. Chapter 30, Do you think I'm strange? Luo Lianqing froze in place, really unable to react. Wasn't she talking about Wenso? Why did she suddenly mention Zhou Qi? She remembered Wenso's previous serious gaze at Zhou Qi's girlfriend, and instantly felt a little unhappy. Okay, not a little, but a lot. You really like big-breasted lolitas, don't you? Luo Lianqing didn't even notice that her voice was a little sour, and her gaze at Wensu was still a little aggrieved. Wensu was a little speechless at her rhetorical question. Can't you let big-breasted Lori go? When did I say I like big-breasted Lori? Luo Lianqing pouted, didn't say anything, was unhappy, and didn't want to chat anymore. Seeing that she didn't want to answer, Wensu didn't force her, but in his heart he was a little more certain of his guess. He led Luo Lianqing towards the snack area. Do you want to buy some snacks? This time, she showed a little interest, and then Wensu discovered that most of the snacks she picked were high in calories and would make her fat if she ate too much. You're not afraid of getting fat buying these? Wensu asked hesitantly. Luo Lianqing, who was picking out potato chips, stopped moving. Her face didn't look very good, and her voice trembled a little. Am I fat? After she finished speaking, she looked down at herself. Although there was a little bit of fat around her waist, her six-pack was still there. It didn't seem like she had gained any weight on her legs either. My breasts have definitely grown a little recently. She was a little dazed. Was she fat? Luo Wuqing suddenly reached over and took Wensu's hand, which was next to her, and placed it on her waist. Wensu could feel through her clothes that her waist was very thin and soft. He looked at his hands and felt that they could encircle her waist. This outfit really shows off her figure, with a thin waist, long legs and big breasts. Wensu suddenly looked away, but his hand couldn't help but squeeze her waist a little before he pulled back, pretending to wipe his nose casually. He secretly let out a sigh of relief that he hadn't actually had a nosebleed. She's not fat, I was just asking, don't be nervous. When he spoke, he realized that his voice was a little hoarse. Luo Lianqing felt a little let down. Didn't Miao Miao say that some physical contact could show whether he liked her or not? Why did Wensu still not react after feeling her waist? Was there not enough contact? Luo Yuqing felt that they could be closer next time, at least he didn't seem to object. I usually go to the gym. Even though she said this, she still couldn't bear to put the 2 bags of potato chips back. I don't go to the gym, so how come you have muscles? She asked Wensu curiously. I haven't seen you go out. Her reluctance was so vivid that Wensu felt a little sorry for her, so he took the potato chips she had just put back and put them in the shopping cart again. Then he saw Luo Lianqing's eyes light up. I go to the gym occasionally, and I also go play ball with friends. He pushed the shopping cart on, but I'm lazy, so I don't go often. Along the way, he picked up a lot of things in bits and pieces. Wensu noticed that today's Luo Lianqing was really different. For example, she would often have unintentional physical contact with him. And every time those big eyes of hers looked a little guilty, it was obvious that she was doing it on purpose. Wensu didn't say anything, but he wanted to see what she was up to. When it came time to pay at the self-checkout, Luo Lianqing stopped Wensu and said seriously, I'll do it. You're still a student, don't spend money recklessly. Wensu found this a little funny. Aren't you a student too? Senior. I'm different, I have a part-time job. A drawing is quite valuable. Luo Lianqing pushed him away and habitually glanced at the small shelf next to her where she had placed things. Then suddenly she reached out and took a box of family planning supplies. She muttered, I wanted to buy them last time but forgot. Wensu, who was standing nearby. Although he knew that she just wanted to take a look, it was really misleading. He reached out and awkwardly covered his face, then glanced around. Finally, he met the gaze of a young man who looked like a student. The man was a little embarrassed by his gaze and quickly looked away. Wensu, I hope they're not students from their school, otherwise it would really be embarrassing. And it's hard to explain. Luo Lianqing still didn't know anything, so after a neat checkout, she reached out to take the 2 big bags. Wensu held her wrist and moved her hand away, saying, I'll do it. Then he picked up the 2 big bags. Luo Lianqing blinked, followed him, and asked, Can I carry one? No, you don't. Just follow me and go home. The boy stared at the 2 figures in the distance with a dumbfounded expression on his face, feeling as if he had discovered something extraordinary. He took out his phone and tried to take a picture of their backs, determined that today's post on the forum would be his. But just as he raised his phone, he noticed the boy walking in front of him suddenly turn his head in his direction. The boy put the phone down a little nervously. It wasn't until the two had walked away that the boy clicked on the school forum and decisively posted. Shit. I ran into Luoshan at the supermarket today, and I've fallen out of love. She was with a guy. The first floor said, Artie, she wasn't just with a guy, she was buying a human cub burp bag. I'm heartbroken. But U1S1, she's absolutely beautiful even without makeup. Recently, the school flower poll has been quite popular. As soon as this post was sent, someone asked who the guy was, and there's no truth without pictures. The guy replied with a sad face, he's a pretty tall and gentle guy, probably a senior. I can't dare to take a picture. As soon as I raised my phone, he looked at me. It's like he has eyes in the back of his head. The two people in the commotion above them didn't know yet. Luo Lianqing only noticed that he suddenly turned his head and looked behind him, a little curious. Did he meet someone he knew? No. Wensi shook his head, thinking about the box of birth control products. He glanced at her and said, do you buy so much of it? Ah. Oh, you mean the birth control products you just bought? They're useless. I just bought them to look at. Luo Lianqing no longer felt the awkwardness she had felt at the beginning when she said this. After all, Wensu had seen her more socially awkward appearance before. There are still differences between foreign countries and China. In China, it seems that they don't distinguish between sizes. Luo Lianqing whispered, the first time I went to the pharmacy to buy it, I was surprised that they just took it out without asking. Wensu, I don't want to discuss this kind of topic. In fact, I wasn't embarrassed buying it abroad before, but when I came back, I realized that everyone seems to be quite embarrassed to ask about these things in China. I guess it's just a difference in habits. Luo Yiqing sighed. I still remember when I first returned to China, I went straight to the store to buy them. The way the old woman next to me looked at me was just. It was quite uncomfortable. She looked at Wensu and asked very seriously, do you think I'm strange? Or did my behavior just now make you feel embarrassed? Wensu saw her head hang down slightly in disappointment. If there is anything you can tell me, I will pay attention in the future.